The job listing said, Overnight Security Associate, Fulfillment Center, Fall River, Massachusetts. $15 an hour, plus a $1.50 shift differential for nights. I read it twice in the parking lot of the Brockton Econo Lodge, sitting in my car with the engine off because running it wasted gas. And then I clicked apply and set my phone face down on the passenger seat. Outside, the lot was half full. A woman in nursing scrubs was loading grocery bags into a Civic 2 spaces over. She glanced at me once, the casual sweep you do when you sense motion nearby, then went back to her bags. Nobody looked at me and saw a problem. That was the thing about civilian life I was still getting used to. People stopped caring what you were. I picked the phone back up and submitted the application. That was a Thursday. They called the following Monday, which I took as a sign of how badly they needed people rather than a sign of my qualifications. The woman on the phone was pleasant and quick. Orientation. Wednesday at 4 p.m, Fall River facility. I wrote the address on the back of a gas station receipt and taped it to the dashboard. I didn't tell anyone. There was nobody to tell. My brother was in Phoenix, and we talked maybe twice a year. Sarah, my wife, separated, not yet legally finalized, had moved to her sister's place in Providence, and we coordinated through a calendar app. I had a box of books, and a box of kitchen stuff, and a box labeled Leo, M-I-S-C, in her handwriting, sitting in a hallway I hadn't yet found the nerve to visit. So the calendar stayed empty. I circled Wednesday on the free motel calendar by the door and went back to watching cable news with the sound low and trying not to think too hard about the previous 11 months. The facility was bigger than I'd expected, which is saying something because I had expected large. I followed a service road off the highway exit for about a mile until the warehouse appeared on my right, low and wide across a flat clearing. It sat pushed back against an old tree line, dense, close-set growth, the kind of trees that have been standing a very long time. And even on a clear Wednesday afternoon, the forest edge looked dark. The parking lot alone was bigger than 3 football fields. The building was clad in pale gray metal siding with floodlights mounted every 30 feet along the roof line, not yet on, but mounted the way things are mounted when the night shift depends on them. I parked in the visitor section and sat for a moment. The building hummed. I could feel it from inside the car, a low vibration rising up through the asphalt in the seat and settling in my chest. It wasn't unpleasant. It was mechanical and regular and asked nothing of you. I got out and went inside. The lobby was fluorescent and clean. A front desk attendant handed me a visitor badge and a form to sign and pointed to a row of chairs where 2 people were already waiting. A kid in his early 20s with a thin beard he was still hoping would fill in, and a woman in her mid-40s with a lunch bag on her lap and the expression of someone who had been through enough orientation sessions to stop finding them interesting. We nodded at each other and waited. At 4:15, a door to the interior opened. The man who came through it was around late 50s, solid in the way that suggests someone had been large once and the mass had simply organized itself differently over time. Close-cropped gray hair. A face that had the quality of old leather, not worn down but toughened. Dark gray uniform with a security patch on the chest and a radio on his hip. He moved through the lobby the way you move when you've walked the same floors for years and don't need to think about where your feet are going. His eyes found the 3 of us, counted, settled into neutral. "Orientation group?" he said. We said yes. "Silas Black, head of overnight security." No handshake. He said it like he was reading from a roster. "Follow me." The tour took close to an hour, and by the end of it, I had a reasonable mental map of the place. The facility ran on a numbered sector system, 1 through 8, arranged around a central conveyor spine that ran the length of the building. Above the main floor, a mezzanine catwalk extended from the north end to the south, running at about 30 feet up with a knee-high railing on the warehouse-facing side. Cameras were mounted every 30 feet along the ceiling trusses. The break room and security office sat near the lobby on the west side. The incinerator chute was on the east wall, behind the returns processing station. Black walked us through all of it and named things. Conveyor control panel, facilities use only, camera feeds pulled to office monitors, checked on each circuit, break room, 15 minutes per shift, not including lunch. He said these things and kept moving. The kid asked if there was a vending machine. Black said yes. I was doing what I've always done in unfamiliar spaces, cataloging details without deciding to. Old cop habit, the exit locations, the angles the cameras covered and the spots they likely didn't. One section, Sector 4, northeast corner, where the overhead lighting was on a slightly different circuit. The color temperature running warmer and marginally dimmer than the rest of the floor, not enough to notice unless you were specifically looking. I was. After the tour, Black brought us back to the security office and gave each of us a laminated card, about the size of a playing card with text on one side. I took mine and caught the header. Overnight Protocol, Fall River FC. Below it, 5 numbered items in clean, small print. "Read those," Black said. "Know them." "What are they for?" the kid asked. Black looked at him for a beat. "This facility has some history with the land it's built on. The protocols keep things running smooth." The kid looked down and read the card. The woman put hers in her pocket. I turned mine over, found nothing on the back, and slipped it into my jacket. "Questions about the protocols?" Black asked. Silence. "Good." He passed out tax forms and badge paperwork, and we filled everything out at the table, and that was orientation. The kid and the woman left at 5:30. I lingered a moment checking my forms, and when I looked up, Black was watching me. "Prior work history says law enforcement," he said. "It does." "You'll want to investigate things," he said. Not a question. I didn't respond. That instinct is a liability here. This job is observation and compliance. You observe, you follow protocol, you call it in if something needs calling in. He held my gaze a moment. "That card matters. Read it before your first shift." I said I would. I drove back to Brockton. The card stayed in my jacket. The first week settled into a routine, and the routine was exactly what I'd been looking for. In at 10, out at 6. Black was always there when I arrived and still there when I left, and in between he moved through the building on a path I never quite tracked. The overnight crew was small. Denise ran the returns processing station on the east side from 10 to 4. Hector did maintenance rounds and worked with the quiet efficiency of someone entirely unbothered by the size or the dark. Terry worked the south dock, a broad, cheerful man whose laugh reached Sector 3 when something struck him funny, which happened often enough that after the second night it stopped startling me. Nobody mentioned the card. Nobody pulled me aside with a look. The nights moved in long, quiet intervals, and I let them move through me. I developed a circuit by the third night. Security office north through sectors 1 to 6, then east to returns and the incinerator chute, then up to the mezzanine catwalk north to south, then down and back to the office. 40 minutes per pass. I did it twice a shift with a desk period between for the monitor review. The mezzanine I went through quickly. The catwalk itself was fine structurally, but the lighting up there broke around the overhead trusses into alternating bands of light and shadow, and the railing was low enough to make itself known to the back of your brain on each pass. Nothing specific, just the general unease that large heights and empty space produce in a quiet building at 2 a.m. I logged it as a quirk of the space and moved on each time. The card stayed in my pocket. I told myself I'd read it when I had a moment. Then I stopped thinking about it. I'd been in law enforcement long enough to know the difference between a genuine operational directive and a hazing ritual new hires were given to see if they'd ask embarrassing questions. 5 strange rules on a laminated card felt like the latter. It felt like the kind of thing Silas Black used to take the measure of new people, to see who'd comply without asking why and who'd need managing. I wasn't going to be managed. I pocketed it and forgot it. The nights were quiet. I slept clean and flat when I got back to the motel, a dreamless sleep from 6 until noon, and for the first time in close to a year, I wasn't grinding my teeth or waking at 3 in the morning going over the evidence chain that ended my career. The routine was a container, and I was grateful for it. 8 days in, it was working. The 9th night started like all the others. I signed in at 10, nodded at black, started my first circuit. Denise was at her station. I heard Hector's cart squeaking somewhere in the 4-5 corridor. Terry's laugh came rolling down from the south dock at 10:40. By midnight, I was back at the office reviewing the camera feeds with a cup of coffee I was pretending was better than it was, and everything on all 60 feeds looked exactly as it always did. Empty aisles, running belts, the mezzanine walkway empty and striped with shadow. At 1 a.m., I started the second circuit. I was passing through Sector 3 at 1:47 when the light changed. I stopped. Sector 4, the northeast corner, had gone wrong. It wasn't the normal dimness I'd cataloged in week 1. The overhead lights had shifted, or something had shifted beneath them, into a color that I can only call sickly. A dull, deep amber orange that was wrong before I could say why, the way you register the pressure drop before you consciously understand a storm is coming. The spaces between the shelving units in Sector 4 looked deeper than they should. The shadows at the back of the rows looked like they had distance in them, which doesn't make sense to write out, but that's what I saw. I stood at the line between Sector 3 and Sector 4. The hair on my arms was up. My hand went into my jacket pocket for my clipboard and found the laminated card. I pulled it out. Standing under the clean white lights of Sector 3, with the amber glow bleeding at the edge of my vision from the right, I read the card. I read it once fast and once slow. By the end of the second pass, my mouth was dry. They weren't hazing. I understood that immediately and without argument, standing there, with that wrongness in the air. They were specific in the way that only experience makes things specific. The way a veteran detective's notes are specific because someone had already been through it and survived and written down exactly what to do. These rules weren't written to test anyone. They were written because someone had needed them. I was still holding the card when the sound started. It came up through the floor first. That was the thing. Not through the air, but through the concrete itself. A slow, low vibration that had nothing in common with the conveyor hum. The conveyor hum was regular and bright and had rhythm. This was deeper than rhythm. It was a groan, steady and enormous, like something very old and very large, shifting weight it had been holding for a long time. It came from every surface at once, and from the center of the building, and it felt less like a sound and more like a change in pressure, the kind that builds behind your eyes when the elevation changes too fast. I looked at the conveyor line running through the gap between Sectors 3 and 4. I watched the belt. The packages were sliding the wrong way. I looked at the card. Rule 1. I looked in the direction of the sound, toward the deep amber dark at the heart of Sector 4, toward wherever that groan was still rolling out of in long, slow waves. Here's what 11 years on the force does to you. You go toward the problem. Every reflex, every piece of training, every late night spent learning that the sound in the dark is information, and information is the only thing that keeps you and the people around you safe, all of it pointed in one direction. Forward, toward the noise, toward the dark with the wrong light in it, and the belts running backward, and the ancient weight moving in the bones of the building. I put the card back in my pocket. I walked toward the sound. The lights of Sector 3 stayed white behind me. Ahead, the amber dark of Sector 4 waited at the end of the aisle, and the groan moved through the floor under each step, slow and patient, like breathing. I was still a cop. That was the problem. I was still a cop, and somewhere ahead of me in the dark, something already knew it. Sector 4 smelled wrong before I saw anything. I noticed it 2 steps past the boundary line. A low, damp cold that had no business being in a climate-controlled building in June. not the dry chill of an overworked AC unit. This was older. It hit the back of my throat with the quality of water that had been sitting in the dark a very long time. My grandmother had a root cellar under her house in Dorchester, and in summer it smelled of cold stone and standing water. This was worse than that. The root cellar smelled like earth. This smelled like something beneath the earth. The amber light was worse up close. From the Sector 3 border, it had looked like a circuit issue. Standing inside it, the color sat just outside comfortable, and the shadows between the shelving units were deeper than the fixtures could account for. I looked down the aisle. Packages in their normal configuration. Nothing moved. I kept walking toward the conveyor spine. The groan was still there, slower now, lower, like something that had been holding its breath had begun to exhale. At the end of the main corridor, I stopped and watched the sorter line. The packages were going the wrong way. Not jammed, not cycling from an error. Wrong way, smooth and steady, the belts pulling everything south to north in full reverse. It looked almost normal. The wrongness was only in the direction, and somehow that made it worse than any obvious malfunction. I was stepping back toward the break room when I saw the package. It was on the belt about 20 feet down, easy to pick out because it was dark. Wet. It left a smear on the belt surface as it slid past, and the moisture in the amber light looked almost black. The air around it was colder, a localized cold I felt drop by 10 degrees as it approached. I reached out and stopped it. The moment my hand touched it, I almost let go. Soaked through, heavy, the cardboard soft the way it gets after time underwater. The dark fluid on my palm was cold in a way that hurt, bone deep, like plunging your hand into ice water. And the smell hit me all at once. The same root cellar smell, but concentrated, like pressing your face to a drain. I turned it over. The label was dry and clearly printed. Everything else about the package was degraded, but the label was intact. Resident of the Deep. No address. No return address. No tracking barcode. My right hand moved toward the scanner on my belt. 11 years of evidence processing. You find a thing. You document the thing. My fingers were on the scanner handle before I caught myself. Rule 3. I held still. No scanning. No logging. The rule was telling me specifically not to do the one thing my entire career had trained me to do. I let go of the scanner. I turned east and started walking toward the incinerator chute. The cold from the package was spreading up my forearms. I kept my eyes level, not looking up at the mezzanine. 40 feet to the return station. I pushed through the gate and reached for the incinerator handle when my elbow caught the flashlight clip on my vest. The light came on and swung upward. It swept the mezzanine railing in one wide arc and held. Something was there. It was a face. Pale, leaning over the railing, looking down. The pale wasn't complexion, it was surface. The smooth, absolute surface of the inside of a shell. And where the eyes should have been, the skin simply continued, unbroken. No sockets, no features. A face assembled by something that understood what a face was supposed to look like from a description, but had never seen one. There was nothing to see with, and it was seeing me. I dropped the flashlight. The beam hit the floor sideways, and I was already moving, both hands back on the package, the last 15 feet to the incinerator door. I hit the handle, yanked it open, shoved the package in, slammed it shut. Both hands flat on the door, breathing. The cold was gone. Not gradually, between one breath and the next. The root cellar smell vanished completely. The groan in the floor faded back to the baseline conveyor hum. I stood there and counted my heartbeats to 30 before I turned around. The returns area was empty. The mezzanine above was dark and still. The flashlight was on the floor 6 feet away, still on, throwing a yellow circle on the concrete. I picked it up. I did not shine it upward. The security office was 10 by 12 with a desk, a chair, and the monitor bank, 8 screens running 12 camera feeds on rotation. I came in, shut the door, and sat down. My forearms were still cold where the package had pressed against them. The monitors cycled normally. Sectors 1 through 6, North Dock, South Dock, Mezzanine. I watched the mezzanine feed come up. The catwalk was empty. The lighting up there was normal. I looked at the wall clock. 2:58 a.m. The last rule: do not look into the security monitors after 3 a.m. I had 2 minutes. I watched the North Dock feed the way I used to watch security footage at a scene, systematically, professionally, looking for the shape I'd seen at the railing. The clock hit 3 a.m. I didn't look away. The monitors frosted over. It started at the bezels, a white, crystalline film growing inward, and the feeds disappeared one by one. Before the last screen went white, I saw the shapes in the frost weren't quite the warehouse. Same geometry, but stretched, distorted, like a reflection in water after a stone drops through it. Then I saw the figure in the glass panel above the monitor bank, the cable management cover, a reflection in it. A man standing behind my chair. Older, compact, in a flat-brimmed cap and brass-buttoned uniform, mid-century postal service. He was holding a bag that moved from the inside, something shifting slowly against the canvas. He raised one arm and pointed to his right. In the building's orientation, that meant south. South exit. Rule 4. I did not turn around. I said nothing. I watched him in the reflection and held still. The radio crackled. "Hey!" Terry's voice, stripped of his usual ease. "Hey, can someone—" "Mezzanine." Static swallowed the rest. I picked up the radio and started to respond and stopped. The voice changed. A woman's voice. Older. The specific cadence of someone I hadn't heard since a hospital room in 2021. My mother has been dead 5 years, and I know exactly what her voice sounds like, and this was it. The pitch, the pacing, the way her sentences always trailed off waiting for you to finish them. "Leo," she said, "just come up." I set the radio down. The voice shifted. Sarah. The slight roughness in her lower register, the particular way she said my name when she was being patient. "It's okay. Just come up to the mezzanine. I'm waiting." I gripped the edge of the desk with both hands. Every rational thought I had knew what this was. The card in my pocket, the rule, the clear mechanics of what the entity was doing, using voices it had learned from my 3 breaches, using them as a lure to walk me up those stairs. My body heard Sarah's voice and wanted to stand up. I held the desk and let the wanting move through me without acting on it. The radio said my name one more time in her voice and went quiet. I sat in the silence. The frost on the monitors had stopped spreading. In the reflection above the screens, the figure in the postal uniform was gone. Cap, bag, buttons, all of it. Behind my chair was empty floor. I let go of the desk. My hands had gone white at the knuckles. The clock read 3:04 a.m. 3 rules broken in 90 minutes. Rule 1 when I walked toward the sound instead of the break room. Rule 2 when the flashlight swept the mezzanine. Rule 5 when I kept watching the monitors past 3 a.m. I'd followed Rule 3 by about 4 seconds of pure reflex. Muscle memory had nearly beaten the protocol on that one. And Rule 4 I'd held, barely, by not turning around and not speaking. 3 breaches. The thing above me had used each one like a bearing, orienting toward me the way you triangulate a position from signal data. It had the shape of me now. It had my name in the voices of people I'd lost. 30 feet up in the dark of the mezzanine, something without eyes was waiting with complete patience because it had no particular relationship with time and no reason to hurry. I thought about the 3 guards before me. Black had said it without saying it. That card matters. He'd said it with the flatness of someone who had watched people ignore it before and had watched what came next. 3 times. 3 overnight guards who had not, in the end, survived the instruction to take it seriously. I'd treated it as hazing. I'd applied the framework that worked for 11 years. Assess the situation, identify the pattern, document, and report. Every single tool I had was wrong for this. Not the situation, not the entity. Me. My tools were wrong. I sat with that. Then I straightened up, turned on the desk lamp, and opened the top drawer. The emergency kit was where I'd seen it since my first week. A red plastic box with standard first responder contents, and along the back of the drawer, 4 road flares banded with a rubber band. I pulled them out and set them on the desk. Flares wouldn't do anything to the thing on the mezzanine directly. Nothing on the card suggested light repelled it. But light was real. Light was the physical insistence of the normal world operating on its normal terms, and whatever the logos was, it existed in the places the normal world left gaps. The flares were a last resort. I put 2 in my vest pocket and held 2. Then I looked at the frosted monitors and the silent radio and thought about what the remaining rules were actually telling me to do. Rule 4 was the one I'd just held by staying seated. The postal worker, the figure in the reflection, not a fix, a hold. It would need completing. Rule 1 was where everything had started to go wrong. 20 minutes in the break room. The card was specific about the time. Exactly 20 minutes, not 15, not 30. The specificity of a ritual, not the vagueness of a suggestion. I understood, sitting there, that I hadn't yet earned those 20 minutes. The sequence had to complete in order. There were things that needed to happen before the break room would mean anything. Going now would just be hiding. I stood up. I put the flashlight in my vest, off. I opened the office door and stepped out. The floor was loud, the full reverse of the conveyor system, the entire length of the facility, running a rhythm the building wasn't designed for. I stood in the doorway and let my eyes adjust. There was a figure standing between sectors 2 and 3, 60 feet away, flat-brimmed cap, brass buttons catching the amber light, the mailbag at his side moving slowly from within. I raised my right arm and pointed south. He held still for a moment. Then he turned and walked toward the south wall, and between one step and the next, he was gone. Not around a corner, simply gone. The aisle empty. The conveyor belts ground to a halt. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd heard all night. I stood in the doorway and held still in that silence, and understood that the worst of it was still ahead, and that it was mine to walk into alone. I gripped the unlit flare in my right hand. Then I turned off the desk lamp behind me and started walking toward the mezzanine stairs. The radio on the desk was still. The frosted monitors glowed faint white in the empty office behind me. My footsteps on the concrete were the only sound left in the building. It wasn't a prank. It wasn't a hazing ritual, and it wasn't a breakdown, and it wasn't the stress of 11 months catching up to me in the quiet of a large building at 3 a.m. This was a hunt, and I had just spent 90 minutes telling the hunter exactly where I was. The mezzanine stairs were a straight metal flight at the north end of the main floor, 12 steps up to a landing, and then the catwalk running south from there. I'd walked them twice per shift every night for 9 days without thinking about them. They were just part of the circuit, the same as every other section of the building. I stood at the bottom of them now and looked up. The strip lighting along the catwalk was running normally, same color temperature as the main floor, no amber, no dimming. It looked exactly the way it looked on every other night of my first week here. That should have been reassuring. It wasn't. The normalcy of it felt deliberate. The way a room looks right before you realize something in it is wrong. I had the unlit flare in my right hand. The flashlight was back in my vest, off. Rule 2 was already broken. I'd done that in the returns area when my elbow caught the clip. Breaking it a second time wasn't going to change anything. I put my left hand on the railing and started up. The trick with the watch I'd learned in my 3rd year on the force from an older detective named Carver, who talked about procedure the way other people talked about weather, constantly and without prompting. He told me once that the crystal face of an analog watch made a crude mirror. Hold it at the right angle, and you could see around a door frame or a corner without putting your head past the edge. The reflection was small and curved, and you couldn't make out fine details, but you could see shapes and movement, which was usually all you needed. I'd used it maybe a dozen times over 11 years, mostly in building searches, usually in the dark. At the top of the stairs, I stopped and stood on the landing. The catwalk ran away from me in a straight line to the south wall, maybe 80 feet. The railing on the right side opened to the main floor, 30 feet below. I unstrapped the watch from my wrist, tilted it in my hand until I had the angle, and held it up at chest height to catch the reflection of the catwalk ahead of me. The image was small, a compressed strip of grating and railing curved at the edges from the crystal. I adjusted the angle slowly. I found the face about 40 feet down. It was crouched near the knee-high railing on the right side, folded in a way that made the joints look arranged differently than mine. The face was turned toward the stairs, toward me. That smooth, pale surface, the continuous unbroken skin over where eyes would sit, catching the strip lighting and giving back a flat white reflection with no depth in it. It wasn't moving. I kept still. I looked at the small, curved image and made myself breathe and think. It was near the railing. That railing ran the full length of the catwalk and mounted to the wall at the catwalk midpoint, roughly 45 feet from where I stood, was a red box I'd noted during the orientation tour and filed away without thinking about it again. Manual override for the fire suppression system. I'd seen the specs on a laminated sheet in the break room, the one on the wall next to the shift schedule that nobody reads. Total suppression in under 30 seconds from lever activation, chemical foam from the ceiling heads, full coverage. Whatever the Logos was, it lived in the quiet and the dark and the spaces where the real world went soft and left gaps. A blast of foam and noise and cold water from every ceiling head at once was the opposite of that. It was the ward made into a weapon. The panel was 45 feet down the catwalk. The entity was crouched 5 feet past it, between the panel and the south wall. I started moving, watch held at chest height, eyes on the small, curved reflection, not looking directly at the thing, not looking at the railing, not raising the flashlight. Just the image in the crystal and my footsteps on the metal grating, which were louder than I wanted, but there was nothing to be done about that. 20 feet in, the cold started. It was different from the cold of the package, broader, a general drop in the air temperature that came with proximity to the thing rather than to what it had touched. The root cellar smell came in a few steps after, faint at first and then stronger, that specific ancient standing water smell I now recognized without needing to think about what it meant. It had known I was here since the stairs. It was patient in a way that had nothing to do with willpower. In the watch reflection, I saw it shift. Not stand. Adjust. The posture changed, the folded shape against the railing realigning, the head moving fractionally toward me, the smooth surface catching the strip light at a new angle. 30 feet in. The panel was 15 feet ahead. The thing was 25 feet beyond it. I was closing the distance, and it was tracking me without moving, orienting in the way a predator orients when it knows the prey is coming and sees no reason to hurry. I thought about the voices on the radio, my mother's voice, Sarah's voice, each one accurate enough that for one moment, just one, my body had believed it. It had spent my 3 breaches learning the shape of me, what I cared about, what I was afraid of losing. The entity was a good hunter. I could acknowledge that without letting it mean anything. 15 feet to the panel. The cold was working into my hands now, slowing my fingers, putting my thinking slightly behind. I kept the watch angled and kept walking. Then it moved, sideways, along the railing. The motion had a quality I can only describe as approximate, like watching something that understood movement from the outside, but hadn't had enough practice to make it look easy. It slid 3 feet and stopped, positioning itself directly adjacent to the red panel on the wall. I stopped too. 10 feet of catwalk between me and the panel. The entity at the railing 5 feet past it. The strip lighting ran between us, steady and fluorescent and completely indifferent to the situation. In the watch crystal, the face was clear now. The smooth brow, the unbroken skin where eyes should be, the lower half equally featureless where a mouth would be. The proportions were almost right. It had the measurements of a human head. But it was like a thing made from a description by someone who had never actually seen a face. And the wrongness of it was in the precision, how close it was to being correct, and how completely it wasn't. The lower surface moved. The skin shifted, folded, and the sound that came out wasn't a voice and wasn't mechanical noise. It was the groan. The same subsonic rumble I'd been feeling in the floor since 1:47 a.m., but coming from the face now, directed at me, pressing against my chest like a hand laid flat over my sternum. I took one step back. It slid one step forward, toward the panel. I understood. It was cutting off my route to the override. It didn't need to chase me. It needed me to not reach that lever. Hurting. An ambush predator that had shifted tactics when the ambush didn't work. I stopped moving back. I looked at the watch reflection one last time and fixed the position. Red box, wall-mounted, hinged cover, single pull lever. 2 seconds if I moved fast and didn't stop. I put the watch in my pocket. I kept my eyes on the catwalk grating under my feet, and I moved. Not looking up, not looking right. The pale shape, a presence in my peripheral vision at the railing, acknowledged, not engaged. Eyes on the metal grid, counting my steps because I had the distance. 5, 6, 7. The cold hit me like stepping into a freezer. The smell was thick. At my right shoulder, something was there, not touching me, present in that way you feel a person standing too close, a displacement, the edge of a presence your body registers before your brain catches up. 8 steps. My left hand hit the wall. I slid it sideways along the surface and found the raised lip of the panel housing. It was right there. Right shoulder. Inches. Not touching me. I don't know what kept it from touching. Maybe it needed me to look at it first, to acknowledge it directly the way I'd acknowledged the radio by picking it up, the way looking into the monitors at 3 a.m. had given it a line back to me. Maybe the eyes on the floor were a refusal it couldn't breach without my cooperation. Whatever the reason, it stayed at my shoulder, and the groan from it was building, pressing harder, and in that groan, I could hear something trying to form that was not my mother's voice and not Sarah's. The sound the Logos made before it borrowed someone else's voice. What it sounded like was the building itself, in low, continuous pain. I flipped the panel cover. The hinged metal swung up. My hand found the lever. I pulled it. The ceiling came apart. Every suppression head in the mezzanine section fired at once, and the foam came down in a white wall, high pressure, the roar of it swallowing everything in an instant. Not a sound. A percussion. It hit me in the chest and the ears simultaneously. The chemical foam was colder than the water, colder than the cold of the entity's presence, and within 2 seconds, I was soaked through to the skin and completely blind, the foam filling my vision and running into my collar. Then the pain. Behind my eyes and at the base of my skull, at the place where the spine meets the brain. Not the pain of an injury, the pain of a frequency the human body was not built to receive. A silent shriek, 2 seconds long, directed. It had no volume because it had no sound. It was purely pressure, purely wrong, and then it stopped as completely as it had started. I was on my knees on the wet metal grating, both hands over my ears, which did nothing because the sound had been internal. I stayed that way for a moment. Then I took my hands down, opened my eyes, and looked. Foam everywhere. White and dense on the railing and the grating and the wall. The strip lighting still on, filtered now through haze, casting everything in a washed-out white. To my right, the railing section was empty. No shape crouched against it. No pale, smooth surface. The cold was gone. The ancient water smell was gone. What was left was the ordinary cold of wet clothes and air conditioning and industrial foam, which is a completely normal and manageable kind of cold. I sat on the wet catwalk for a minute and let the shaking in my hands run its course. It took about 60 seconds. Then I stood up, found the wall, followed it to the stair housing, and came down one step at a time to the main floor. The conveyor belts were still. The amber in Sector 4 was gone. The overhead lights ran white and even. The building sounded like it was supposed to sound. The hum, the baseline mechanical breathing of a functioning facility. I walked to the break room. The clock on the wall said 3:41 a.m. I sat in the chair closest to the door and laid my hands flat on the table in front of me and looked at the clock face. Rule 1. Break room for exactly 20 minutes. I'd broken it first, back at the start of all of this, when I'd walked toward the sound at 1:47 a.m. instead of here. But the break room was the end of the sequence, the ritual parameter that closed the loop. Not a punishment, and not a hiding place. A deliberate disruption of the thing's hunting cycle, a formal statement made with time instead of words. 20 minutes of absence, exact, after everything else had been addressed. That was the ritual. I was at the end of it now. I watched the second hand on the clock. 3 minutes in, my hand stopped shaking. 7 minutes in, the pressure behind my eyes was gone. 12 minutes in, the conveyor hum came back, the normal forward rhythm, the one I'd spent a week learning to stop consciously hearing. It had come back at some point, and it sounded exactly as it was supposed to. 15 minutes in, I thought about Sarah. Not the voice. The actual Sarah. The one whose handwriting was on a cardboard box in a hallway in Providence that I hadn't found the nerve to go pick up. I thought about her for maybe half a minute. Then I let the thought settle and went back to watching the clock. 20 minutes. I stood up. I pushed the chair in. I walked to the door and out onto the main floor. The warehouse hummed. The belts ran forward. The lights were white across all 8 sectors, and nothing moved in the shadows between the shelving units, except my own reflection in a Sector 2 safety mirror as I walked past it. Back in the office, I sat down and looked at the monitors. The frost was gone, every feed cycling normally. The mezzanine camera showed the catwalk coated in foam, suppression heads still dripping, railing empty and wet. Everything as it should be. I took the laminated card from my jacket pocket, damp from the foam. I read all 5 rules beginning to end. Then I took the blank notepad from the top drawer and wrote out all 5 rules from memory, 1 per line, neat and legible, and checked them against the card. I had them right. I closed the notepad and put it in my vest pocket next to the 2 unused flares. The night had 3 hours left in it. I picked up my clipboard and started my 3rd circuit of the building, walking the long empty aisles. The hum was just the hum. The shadows were just the shadows. For now. The last 3 hours of the shift were quiet. I did a 3rd circuit and then a 4th, which I hadn't done before. The routine was 2 per shift, but the routine had been built by a man who didn't know what was in the building. I knew now. I walked all 4, moving through each sector in sequence, checking the things I was supposed to check, marking the clipboard at each station. The conveyor belts ran forward the whole time. The lights stayed white across all 8 sectors. Sector 4 was the same marginally warm dimness it always was on a normal night. Nothing more, nothing different. I noted that on the clipboard anyway, because noting things was the reflex I had, and I saw no reason to stop it. At 4:15, I checked the incinerator chute. The indicator light on the housing showed the interior was still above operating temperature. The package had burned completely. No residue. I stood at the door with my hand on the housing for a moment, and then moved on. At 4:30, I passed the return station. Denise had left at 4, same as every night, her workstation powered down and coat hook empty. At 4:45, the south dock was locked and dark. Terry gone at the same time as Denise. Everything where it was supposed to be. Nothing that shouldn't be there. By 5:30, I was at the security office desk, filling in the night's incident report. I sat with the pen over the form for a while before I started writing anything. The form wanted incident type, location, time, description, action taken. I thought about what was true and what was technically true, and where the line between those two things sat on a document going into a facility records file. Then I wrote, mezzanine-level fire suppression system was activated at approximately 0330 hours due to sensor anomaly. System performed as designed. No personnel were present in the affected zone at time of activation. Mezzanine catwalk and suppression heads require inspection and cleaning before the next operational cycle. Recommend facilities team review prior to day shift. All of it was technically true. I signed it, dated it, and put it in the night report slot. The notepad I'd started during the shift was still in the desk drawer, the blank one I'd used to write out the 5 rules from memory and check them against the card. I folded it and put it in my vest pocket next to the 2 road flares I hadn't needed. The laminated card went back in my jacket pocket, warped and slightly stiff from the foam, but still legible. At some point, I made a cup of coffee from the break room machine and came back to the desk and sat and drank it and waited for the clock to reach 6. I watched the monitor feeds cycle through their 2-minute rotation. The mezzanine feed showed the catwalk coated in foam residue, suppression heads still dripping, railing empty. Everything as it should be. I went out through the north dock door at 5:55. The overnight staff used the lobby entrance, but I wanted to be outside and sitting, and the dock steps were there, a short concrete flight from the dock door to the service road, facing east toward the old tree line. The same dense, close-set growth I'd noticed the first day when I'd pulled off the service road and sat in my car and felt the building hum through the seat. It looked the same now as it had then. Whatever had happened inside the building over the last 4 hours, the trees were exactly the same trees. I sat on the top step with my damp clothes starting to stiffen as they dried and my arms resting on my knees. The sky was doing what it does in early June at that hour. Dark blue giving way to gray, giving way to the pale color that isn't night, but isn't quite dawn either. The light coming up from behind the trees in flat, colorless bands. For the first time in 11 months, the evidence locker wasn't running in the back of my head. The internal affairs review, the resignation letter, the drive to Brockton with 2 boxes in my trunk. Those things were still true, still the shape of my life as it was now. But they were sitting somewhere behind me in the quiet, and I was looking at the tree line instead of turning to look at them. At 5:58, I heard a car on the gravel. A door. Footsteps that came past me without stopping and went through the dock door into the building. I stayed on the steps. Silas Black was inside for about 4 minutes. Then the door opened, and he came out and stood at the top of the steps. He didn't sit. He stood the way he always stood, like a man who'd made a decision long ago not to fully settle into any place. "Incinerator's still hot," he said. "I used it," I said. He came down 1 step. "Mezzanine's going to need work. Suppression system triggered. Sensor anomaly. It's in the report." He was quiet for a moment. I kept my eyes on the tree line. "Mezzanine suppression is on a separate trigger circuit from the main sensors," he said. "Sensor anomalies don't activate it. Manual does." I didn't say anything to that. He held out his hand. I reached into my jacket and took out the laminated card. Warped, dried foam across the bottom third. Text still clear on both passes. I put it in his hand. He looked at it for a moment, then closed his fingers around it and put it in his own jacket. "How many did you break?" he said. 3. Rule 1, Rule 2, Rule 5. He nodded. Not agreement, just acknowledgement. The flat registration of a fact. 3, he said. "And you're sitting here." Rule 3 I followed. Rule 4 I held in the office and completed on the floor. I pointed south. He left. The belts stopped. Black looked at the tree line for a long moment. The light was coming up properly now, the flat gray giving way to pale yellow at the eastern edge where the sun was starting to clear the treetops. "You did better than the last 3, he said. I'd been thinking about the last three since 3:04 a.m. 3 overnight guards before me. 3 people who had received the same card and had not, at the end of their respective nights, been sitting on dock steps watching June light come up between trees. I'd thought about them in the break room counting the second hand. I'd thought about them on the 3rd circuit and the 4th. I hadn't reached any conclusions. Just carried the number the way you carry a number when it has people attached to it. How many did they break? I asked. Doesn't matter, he said. They broke enough. He didn't say anything else about them. I didn't push. Somewhere out on the highway a truck passed, its sound traveling clear and flat across the morning air before fading. 3, I said. And it still worked out. Black turned his head and looked at me. Not the flat tally from orientation night, something with more weight in it. The look of a man who has been watching for a particular result and is trying to confirm he's seeing it. This time, he said. The 2 words settled in the air between us, and I let them settle. I understood what they meant. The entity wasn't gone. The suppression system had severed its hold on this particular night, disrupted the specific configuration I'd created with 3 breaches in 90 minutes. The ward restored, the hunting cycle broken, the thing back in the deep shadows where it lived when it wasn't active. But next week the building would still be here. The mezzanine would be cleaned and inspected, and the catwalk would go back to looking the way it always looked. The thing would still be there in the negative space between defined places, the same as it had always been. It was eternal. Black had been doing this for years. The last 3 guards were gone. This was one night of something that didn't end. This time, I said. He nodded and looked back at the tree line. We sat in the growing light for a while without talking. Somewhere in the main lot, the first day shift cars were starting to pull in. At 6:10, Black stood up from the step and went back inside without another word. He'd said what needed saying. I stayed on the steps for another 20 minutes. I kept the job. Not because I lacked options, but because I understood now what the job actually was. The laminated card was not hazing, and not a test, and not corporate policy. It was a set of protocols a building required to function as a building instead of something else, and someone needed to be here overnight to follow them, and that someone needed to understand what they were following them for. I bought a composition notebook from a Brockton drugstore the next day. 5 rules on the first page in clean block letters. A blank second page. The 3rd page was the beginning of a running log. Date, shift, observations, conveyor status, package labels checked, Sector 4 condition, mezzanine. Case file format, because case files were the language I thought in and the tool wasn't the problem, only the assumptions I'd been applying it to. I came in 30 minutes early each night. I read the rules from the notebook's first page before each shift. Not because I didn't know them, I had them memorized front to back within a week of that night, but because the reading was part of the preparation. The same way you check your gear before going in regardless of how many times you've done it before. The act of checking has its own value, separate from whether you'd have remembered without it. The nights were quiet, not empty. The building was never actually empty, and I knew now what occupied the parts of it I couldn't see. The quiet of a normal night was the quiet of the ward holding, the thing in the deep shadows kept in the deep shadows by routine and protocol, and the simple fact of a human presence moving through the building with its eyes forward and its hands doing what they were supposed to do. I'd learned to read that quiet the way you learn to read any place you've spent enough time in, as a language with its own texture and vocabulary. In August, I moved out of the Brockton Motel, found a 1-bedroom in Fall River, 7 minutes from the facility. The boxes from Sarah's sister's place in Providence came with me in 2 trips. I unpacked them over a weekend, put the books on shelves and the kitchen things in cabinets. The box labeled Leo, M-esque in Sarah's handwriting, I opened on a Sunday afternoon. A coffee mug I'd had since college, some photographs, a Bruins pennant I'd forgotten I owned, I put them all away in their places without making too much of it. I called Sarah in September, not about the boxes, just to call. We talked for about 20 minutes, and it wasn't what it used to be, and wasn't supposed to be. When we hung up, I sat on the couch in the Fall River apartment and felt the specific shape of what was gone and let it be the shape it was without trying to make it anything different. Then I went to work. Terry still laughed too loud from the South Dock. Denise still left at 4 on the dot. Hector moved through the building on his rounds with the same quiet efficiency he'd had since my first night. Black was always there when I arrived and still there when I left, and I understood by now that this wasn't about shift coverage. The building was the shape his life had taken around itself over the years, the same way it was becoming the shape of mine. There was a loneliness in that which I recognized from the inside and didn't try to name out loud. Some things are understood without needing to be said. One night in October, I came down from the mezzanine and was halfway across the main floor before I realized I hadn't thought about anything except the circuit the whole time I was up there. Not the railing, not the watch trick, not the pale, smooth surface I'd seen 40 feet down the catwalk on the 9th night. Just the handrail and the grating under my feet and the view of the main floor through the railing gaps and the routine carrying me forward. I stopped in Sector 3 and noticed that and let it register. Then I kept walking. I passed the mezzanine stairs on the next circuit and didn't look up, not from fear, but because looking every time would mean it was always an event, and it wasn't an event anymore. It was the stairs. I passed the monitor bank near the lobby on my return and didn't glance at it because I'd reviewed the feeds from the desk at 11:30 and they'd been clean, and I'd noted that and moved on. The building hummed. The belts ran forward. Sector 4 burned white with the rest of the floor. Somewhere in the deep shadows between the shelving units, in the negative space where the light didn't quite reach, and the camera housings had their blind angles, and the hum of the machinery was a fraction off its usual pitch. Something old and patient and hungry sat in the dark, the way it had sat since before this building was built, and would sit long after the last conveyor belt rusted through. And I walked my beat, and I checked my labels, and I kept the ward whole, and the building kept running. That was enough. For now, it was enough. You ever make a decision so dumb, so obviously terrible that even while you're doing it, some deep part of your brain is screaming at you to stop? That was me when I took the night shift job at the Skinwalker Motel. The ad didn't say Skinwalker Motel, of course. It just said, hiring, night clerk, quiet motel outside Tuba City, Arizona, $30 per hour, meals included. I was broke, couch surfing, and 2 months behind on everything. The pay sounded unreal, but I needed it. So I emailed the guy. He replied within minutes. Can you start tonight? That should have been the first red flag, but I ignored it. Desperation is a hell of a drug. I took a bus from Flagstaff to a dusty stop in the middle of nowhere. The motel sat alone in the desert, surrounded by sagebrush and silence, the kind of place that looked abandoned from the road. Shingles missing, sign flickering. The air had that dry, electric weight, like something waiting to strike. The sun was already bleeding into the horizon when I got off. The front office door creaked open before I even knocked. A man stood inside. Tall, graybeard. Red flannel shirt buttoned up. His eyes looked like they hadn't seen sleep in a decade. You Jake? Yeah. He didn't introduce himself. Just handed me a laminated sheet and a metal keychain with the number 0 on it. The key was old and tarnished, like it had been dug up rather than cut. You read those rules, he said. Don't break 'em, not even a little." I looked down at the sheet. There were 10 rules printed in bold type. The sheet he handed me was laminated, but the corners were melted like someone had tried to set it on fire before thinking better of it. 10 rules, simple, short, and somehow more terrifying because of it. The first one? Only check-in guests between 8 p.m. and 11 p.m., no exceptions. I wasn't told what would happen if someone showed up at 11:01, just that I'd better not let them in. Rule 2. Room 3 is always occupied. I wasn't to knock on the door, wasn't to clean it, and sure as hell wasn't to talk about it. I didn't even know where room 3 was yet, and already I hated it. Rule 3 made my stomach drop. If a guest came with no luggage, they were to be given room 5. Then I was to lock the door behind them, from the outside. There was a second key specifically for that. Rule 4. At 12:17 a.m., turn off all the front-facing lights for exactly 5 minutes. No explanation was given, not even a "trust me, just do it." Lights off. Count. Rule 5. If I heard knocking from the supply closet, I was never, under any circumstances, to open it. No matter what I heard, whispers, cries, or begging, I wasn't allowed to open that door. Rule 6 was deceptively simple. Keep the lobby TV on channel 63. Didn't matter if it was playing static or full-blown demonic infomercials, channel 63 stayed on. Rule 7 gave me chills. If I saw a dog in the parking lot, I had to close my eyes. Didn't matter if it looked friendly, didn't matter if it barked or begged. Eyes shut, wait until it's gone. Rule 8. Some guests might try to bribe me for information. About what, I didn't know. But I was told not to answer, not even a single word. Rule 9 felt like some kind of ritual. At 3:33 a.m., I had to drink all the coffee in the black thermos under the desk. All of it. Didn't matter how it tasted, didn't matter if it was still warm. And finally, Rule 10. If a man named Frank showed up, I was to give him the master key and say, "Welcome back." I laughed, out loud. A dry, nervous thing. "You serious with this?" He didn't smile. "You break one rule, Jake, and you're gone. That's if you're lucky." He pointed to the metal door behind the front desk. "Your room's through there. Shift starts at 8. Don't be late." The room was basic. Cot, mini fridge, small TV, no windows. A single bulb buzzed overhead with a migraine's rhythm. I lay down, closed my eyes, and told myself it was a weird old man with a creepypasta sense of humor. I woke up at 7:55 p.m., my heart already thumping like it knew something I didn't. The front office felt different at night. The shadows seemed thicker, more confident. The lights buzzed a little louder, and the silence outside felt anticipatory. At 8 p.m. on the dot, the bell above the door jingled, but instead of dread, I felt a strange calm, almost like muscle memory kicking in. I straightened up, ready to act like this was any other job. The next few hours passed in a strange rhythm. I checked in 2 guests, an elderly couple with heavy luggage and a young man clearly passing through, both normal, both thankfully unaware of the rule sheet under the counter. I handed out keys, smiled, and even managed a bit of small talk. In between, I wandered the motel lobby, trying to memorize the layout. There was a vending machine tucked near the side hallway. An old rotary phone mounted to the wall, though I wasn't sure it worked. The carpet was frayed near room 3, and the door there looked untouched, like no one had opened it in years, yet it still carried the weight of presence. I glanced at the clock. Still early. The television buzzed with soft static, as per Rule 6. My eyes drifted to the parking lot. Nothing out of place. For a moment, I let myself believe that maybe this wouldn't be so bad. Maybe the rules were just old ghost stories to keep new hires from getting lazy. That comfort lasted right up until the bell jingled again, and he walked in. My breath hitched a little. I had expected silence, maybe even hoped for it. But when that bell rang, it felt like a judge's gavel. The man who walked in looked normal. Mid-40s maybe. Clean shirt, dusty boots, no luggage. But there was something in the way he moved, deliberate, unnatural, like he was trying to remember how people walk. "One night," he said, and his voice was flat, completely void of emotion, like he was reciting something he'd memorized but didn't understand. Not a hint of impatience or curiosity, just hollow. I hesitated, long enough for the silence to stretch thin. My mouth had gone dry, like my throat had forgotten how to swallow. Rule 3 echoed in my brain like a warning siren, but even then, part of me hoped I'd misunderstood. Room 5, I managed, steadying my voice by sheer will. I handed him the key, and he took it with fingers that were just a touch too stiff. As we walked the dim hallway together, I caught myself stealing glances. He didn't speak, didn't blink. His eyes looked like glass, smooth and unfeeling. But behind that surface was a depth I couldn't quite explain. They didn't reflect the hallway or anything tangible, instead catching a light from somewhere else, somewhere wrong. Something that looked back at me, not through me. At me, focused, cold, intent. His face was pulled taut, as if it had been worn too long, the skin adapting to a shape it wasn't meant to hold. Under the weak glow of the wall sconce, I caught something twitching beneath the surface of his cheek, like a muscle trying to move the wrong way, like it wasn't used to being there. I opened room 5. He stepped inside like he'd done it 100 times. I shut the door and locked it from the outside. The click echoed louder than it should have. Back at the front desk, I collapsed into the chair, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. I tried to focus on something, anything. The clock, the rule sheet, my own breathing. What the hell kind of motel had rules like these? What kind of place gave you a manual for surviving the night? This felt less like employment and more like a dare, disguised as a paycheck wrapped in dust and unease, a paycheck. The room felt smaller than before, the air thicker. Every creak in the walls, every pop of the old pipes sent my nerves on high alert. I wasn't ready to deal with any of it. I was barely ready to sit still. I reread the rules again and again, each time finding something I had missed, like my brain was trying to decode some puzzle I didn't even know I was playing. My finger hovered over Rule 3. The words blurred slightly. I rubbed my eyes and blinked hard. Outside, the desert was unnervingly still. The air was still, untouched by even a breeze. Not a single insect chirped or fluttered. A complete dense silence pressed in from all sides, like the whole world was holding its breath. And I was the only idiot dumb enough to exhale. The room felt like it was watching me. The shadows leaned in closer. The television on channel 63 crackled softly, static humming like a low whisper. I didn't dare change the channel. That was Rule 6. It stayed on. My eyes wandered to the hallway, and for a brief second, I thought I saw a shadow move past room 3. Just a flicker, but enough to make me freeze. I didn't know what was in that room. I didn't want to. I tried to remind myself I needed this job, but that thought rang hollow. What I needed was to not be in that motel, with its scorched rules and its empty desert, and its guests who wore skin like it didn't belong to them. And the worst part? The night had only just begun. 12:17 a.m. I killed the front lights. Darkness swallowed everything. The desert outside was a pitch, no cars, no bugs, not even wind. Then came the footsteps. The sound of movement slithered around the office, slow and heavy, with a wet drag that defied explanation. It wasn't the gait of a person, nor the rhythm of any animal I'd ever heard. It scraped and slid in irregular patterns, each step thick with weight and hesitation, as though whatever was out there didn't quite know how to move in a body not meant for this world. They circled the office. I could hear their breath fogging up the glass. One paused right behind the front window. My fingers tightened around the desk. Something scraped the door. Fingernail? Claw? I wasn't going to find out. I closed my eyes and started counting seconds. I don't know why. Just instinct. If I kept count, maybe I could control it. 121, 122. When I reached 300, I flipped the lights back on. Nothing there, except for a single muddy footprint in the shape of a hoof. My breath caught. My first thought was that it had to be a prank, maybe an old boot with a carved sole. But as I stared closer, I realized the weight distribution was wrong. The edges of the print were sunk deep into the carpet, like whatever was left had mass, like it had been real. I crouched beside it, my heart hammering in my chest. The shape was unmistakable. Neither a shoe nor a paw, a hoof, but twisted, asymmetrical. Something that had never belonged to any animal in this world. My eyes scanned the room, slowly, every shadow now suspect. I could hear my pulse in my ears and feel my skin tighten over my bones. I tried to stand, but my knees resisted, like they knew something I didn't. I kept staring at the footprint as if it would change, as if it would offer an explanation. It didn't. What had been outside the door? What had tried to get in? And more importantly, had it left? I backed away slowly, never turning my back to that print. I needed to know more, needed to understand the rules, fully understand them. The rules were not warnings, they were survival instructions. And on the floor next to it, my rule sheet. Half burned, smoking, like someone had tried to light it with a match. I leaned over and picked it up. The laminate was warped now, the edges curled like they'd been dipped in acid. My hand shook, but I held onto it like it was a lifeline. I sat the rest of the night behind that desk, eyes on the door, ears twitching at every creak. At 3:33 a.m., I remembered Rule 9. I reached under the desk, pulled out the black thermos, and unscrewed the lid. The smell hit me first, burnt and sour like stale battery acid mixed with rust. I hesitated, staring into the dark liquid. What kind of rule was this? Drink old coffee in the middle of the night? Out here? In this place? It made no sense. Maybe none of the rules did. Still, I raised it to my lips. The first sip was revolting, sharp, and bitter with a metallic aftertaste that clung to the back of my throat. It didn't go down easy. Every swallow made my stomach lurch, but I kept drinking, because the rule said I had to. By the time I finished the last drop, my tongue felt numb and my chest had started to flutter. My heart picked up speed like someone had flipped a switch. A beat, then two, too fast, too hard. Was I panicking? Maybe. Or maybe it was the coffee, doing something it wasn't supposed to do. I pressed a palm to my chest and exhaled slowly, trying to settle my nerves. The pounding didn't stop. Great, I muttered to myself. As if fear wasn't enough, now I've got caffeine-induced heart failure. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just the coffee. It was the room, the motel, the eyes I felt watching me even when the halls were empty. When the sun finally bled across the desert, I didn't feel relief. I felt like I'd survived something I didn't understand, and the worst part was the silence from room 5, heavier than the darkness outside and far more deliberate. A silence that long, that patient doesn't feel like emptiness. It feels like waiting. I wasn't sure if I'd last another night, but I knew one thing for certain. Whatever this place was, it was more than a motel. It was a trap dressed up in vacancy signs and desert dust. And I had just checked in. The second night didn't wait. It didn't ease in. It hit hard like a door slammed shut behind me and locked itself from the other side. I woke again at 7:55 p.m. Like the night before, no alarm or sound, only that same internal jolt, like my body knew it was time, as if something had synced itself to me. I pulled on my shirt, the one from yesterday, the one that still carried the smell of scorched laminate and cold sweat. My fingers hesitated at the doorknob. I told myself to breathe, to be calm, to act normal. But there's no acting normal when you're stepping back into something that doesn't want you to leave. The front office looked the same, but I didn't. I could feel how much one night had changed me. The light felt off, too bright in some places and too dim in others. My skin itched like the air was made of static. At 8:03 p.m. the bell jingled. A guest arrived, an older woman in a brown jacket with a dented suitcase. Her smile was tired, her voice soft, and she didn't seem bothered by anything. I checked her in and gave her room 7. As she walked away, I couldn't help but stare. Why would anyone choose to stay here? This wasn't the kind of motel you stumbled upon. It felt like the place people ended up at because something else had already gone wrong. I thought about my situation. I was here because I was broke, desperate, and cornered. If I had any other option, I'd never set foot in this building. But here I was, stuck. Somehow she seemed completely at peace. I wasn't sure if I envied that calm or feared what it meant. Maybe she knew something I didn't. Maybe she was the kind of person this place attracted, quiet, resigned, drifting toward whatever waited in the dark. It should have made me feel better. It didn't. The rule sheet was still there, curled slightly at the edges where the laminate had burned. I glanced at it again. I didn't need to, but I couldn't stop myself. It was like some small gnawing thought had latched onto the back of my brain and refused to let go. My eyes drifted to that half-melted corner where something used to be, something that had been deliberately erased. I leaned in and flipped the page over. My breath hitched. There, almost hidden beneath the plastic, was a scrawl. A messy black ink sentence warped by heat but still fighting to be read. Rule 11. If someone gives you something from their room, don't keep it. Return it or burn it. And beneath that, smaller and shakier, they bond through memories. They can only reclaim what they gave. I stared at those words until they blurred. My stomach turned with a kind of hollow unease, like I was reading someone's dying confession. Who had written this? And why had they gone so far as to melt the laminate to cover it up? It didn't feel like a prank. It felt like a final cry, a desperate mark left behind by someone who had seen too much and didn't survive it. I could almost picture them scribbling that line in a panic, knowing no one would believe them, hoping someone might. That kind of fear doesn't fade away. It sticks. It grows like mold in the corners of your mind. I caught myself gripping the edge of the desk, knuckles white. Was this how it started? The paranoia creeping in? I had mocked the idea yesterday, brushing off the noises I'd heard when the lights went out. The shuffling, the soft scratching, things I tried to tell myself were just pipes, wind, the natural creaks of a dying building. But deep down, I had heard something. I had ignored it, dismissed it as imagination. And now I was beginning to realize that denial was just the first symptom. Thinking the rules were superstition. But now, something was shifting inside me. I could feel it. The questions, the weight of every glance, every whisper of wind against the window. Maybe this place didn't just hide monsters outside, it planted them inside you. A chill rolled down my spine and my hand trembled slightly as I slid the sheet back under the desk. My heartbeat wasn't driven by fear, it was rehearsing, as if my body was preparing itself for something inevitable, something coming whether I was ready or not. And I wasn't ready, not even close. At 10:15 p.m., I stepped out to smoke. I didn't smoke before this job. Now it felt like the only thing that grounded me. The desert night was still and cold. Sagebrush rustled like dry bones under the sand. That's when I saw it. At the edge of the lot, where the sodium lamp buzzed faintly, stood a dog, mid-sized, short-haired, almost statue still. Its head tilted in that eerie, deliberate way animals sometimes do when they're mimicking curiosity. It wasn't curiosity. It was a routine, something rehearsed and deliberate, like it was waiting for me to react, like it was waiting for a cue. I froze mid-flick with the lighter. Rule 7 echoed in my head with the weight of a warning carved into stone. I turned sharply toward the wall, shut my eyes tight, and tried to push away the pressure blooming in my chest. The dog barked, a short, clipped sound. Then it whimpered, almost pathetically. Then came the growl, low, guttered, dragging against my nerves like a serrated blade. I clenched my eyes harder, my body locking up with the primal need to turn and check. I knew better. I'd read the rule. Still, instinct clawed at me. The silence stretched. My breath caught. Then a voice, almost too close to my ear, broke through. "Jake, please. It's cold. I'm scared. It's me. Open your eyes." It wasn't the words that chilled me. It was the voice. It was mine. A perfect copy, hollowed out and trembling. I bit down on my knuckles hard enough to taste blood. The voice started crying, mimicking my cry, then laughing, then screaming. It flipped through tones like a skipping record of my worst nightmares. It wasn't trying to sound real. It was trying to sound familiar. Then everything stopped. There was no fade. No warning. A hard, unnerving silence that seemed to still the air itself. Even the wind, which had been whispering through the desert moments before, held its breath. My whole body tensed. The sound vacuum was so complete it made my ears ring. I cracked one eye open, barely daring to let in a sliver of vision. The dog was gone. In its place stood a man. He didn't move, just stood there in the exact same spot beneath the flickering light, now dead. His silhouette was sharp against the night, arms stiff, posture too symmetrical, too still to be natural. His face was cloaked in shadow, but I didn't need to see it. I could feel his eyes, like nails driven into the glass between us. They pinned me there. He didn't knock. He didn't call out, just stared. And the longer he stood, the more I realized something wasn't right about the shape of him, like a mannequin posed by someone who didn't understand how human bodies bend. Seconds became minutes. Minutes dragged into hours. I sat frozen, sweat cold on my back, heartbeat a metronome of dread. The clock behind the desk read 12:17 a.m. My breath caught. That was the time, the one from the rule sheet. The one where the lights had to be turned off. But the man was still there, still staring, still mine, and not mine. I hesitated, and then I didn't turn off the lights. I wanted to see him. I needed to know. But the moment passed, and everything shifted. His expression changed, something subtle but unmistakable. His mouth flattened into a hard line. The skin beneath his eyes grew tense, the whites now showing wide and unblinking. He wasn't just watching. He was angry. And then, it started. A pressure behind my eyes, dull at first, then tightening, twisting, like invisible hands pressing into my skull. My temples throbbed, my jaw clenched. I gripped the edge of the desk so hard my fingers went numb. I panicked. My hand shot out and flipped the switch. The lights died. And from somewhere deep in the motel, behind walls or under floors, came a sound so unnatural it scraped the air raw, a high-pitched, gargling shriek. Like metal being torn and a scream forced through water, it came from everywhere and nowhere. Something had been disturbed, and it was angry. At 3:33 a.m., my alarm buzzed low and sharp. I already knew what it meant. The rule about the coffee, the one I thought was ridiculous the first night. Now it felt like a ritual that might hold something back, like a line drawn in the sand against the darkness. I got up, legs weak, and reached under the counter where the thermos always waited, fresh, full, steaming hot. I hadn't made it. I never had. But it was always there at 3:33, like clockwork. My fingers shook as I reached for it. I knocked it once against the counter, nearly spilling it all. The metal burned against my palms, but I clung to it like it was the only solid thing in the room. I brought it to my lips, hands trembling uncontrollably. The first sip scalded my tongue. The second poured down my chin. I didn't stop. I couldn't. I gulped it down in sloppy, desperate mouthfuls, coffee sloshing over my hands and dripping onto my shirt. My heart began hammering in my chest. It wasn't only the caffeine, it was terror itself, steeped into every gulp, crawling through my veins. This was the only protection I had, a bitter, burning metal of dread disguised as routine, and I drank every last drop. When the coffee was finally ready, I grabbed the thermos with both hands. It burned against my skin, but I didn't care. I brought it to my lips and drank, not in sips, in desperate, messy gulps. Hot liquid spilled down my chin, seared my tongue, and soaked my shirt. My eyes watered from the bitterness, and still I drank. It was awful, sour, metallic, overbrewed. My heart pounded faster with every swallow, but I forced it down. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I thought, if I stop now, something gets through. Something takes the gap. When I finished, the thermos clattered onto the desk, nearly toppling. I pressed my palms into my thighs to stop them from shaking. My heart was racing. It wasn't only the caffeine, it was fear itself, laced through every heartbeat. I was trying to drown in it. And what terrified me most? Even with the sun shining on my face, I could still feel the weight of his stare pressing against my skull like fingerprints scorched into memory. I didn't move the rest of the night. I sat at the desk, knees to my chest, a blanket around my shoulders. Every time I tried to close my eyes, I felt his stare through the wall. The corners of his mouth lifted, just a little, enough to let me know he knew I was still awake. At dawn, he vanished. He didn't walk away or drive off. He simply vanished. Simply gone. Like the light had erased him. It didn't erase the image that burned into my head. His eyes. They were mine. Now, they were inside my dreams. I didn't sleep when my shift ended. I lay on the motel bed in my room, staring at the ceiling. My reflection in the bathroom mirror felt unfamiliar, like it was studying me more than copying. When I blinked, I swore it didn't blink with me. My eyes stung, gritty and red. The whites were splotched with little red veins I didn't remember seeing before. It felt like something had been staring back at me all night and left a residue. I showered, but the water didn't make me feel clean. My skin felt filmy, like I'd brought something invisible back with me, something I couldn't scrub off. All day I tried to distract myself. I walked into town, drank coffee I couldn't taste, bought a pack of smokes from a gas station and made small talk with the cashier. But behind every pair of eyes I met, I kept searching, wondering if they were looking at me or through me. By the time the sun began to fall, my chest was tight. The light shifted again, unnatural, and stretched like the shadows were waiting for permission to move. At 7:55 p.m., my eyes opened before I realized I'd even lain down. A new night was beginning, and I knew it wouldn't let me forget what I saw. The third night began like a breath being held. I woke at 7:55 p.m. with dry eyes and the weight of something imagined pressing down on my chest. No dreams, no clarity, just a thick layer of silence stuck to the walls around me. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my hands for a long time before getting dressed. I skipped the mirror. I didn't need to see what was different. The air outside my room was warmer than usual, the kind of warmth that sticks to your clothes and follows you like a second skin. The lobby looked untouched, clean, but too clean like someone had spent hours scrubbing away evidence of something they couldn't explain. At 8:04 p.m. the bell rang. A man stood at the entrance alone, sharply dressed in a gray suit with dusty shoes. His eyes were strange in how still they were. He arrived without luggage. "Room for one," he said. "Reservation?" "Number. But I've been here before." Something was unsettling about how casually he said it. I found myself wondering what exactly he meant by that. Had he stayed here before? If so, why would he ever come back? I was here because I had no choice, but no one returned to this place willingly, not unless they were searching for something they shouldn't find. He glanced over my shoulder at the lobby TV, which hissed static on channel 63. I followed his gaze instinctively. "Do you ever see anything on that screen?" he asked. I didn't respond right away. That question weighted it, like he knew something I didn't. "No," I finally said. He tilted his head slightly, then smiled. "Not yet, then." That answer stuck with me. What exactly did he expect me to see? I wondered if the static on that channel was hiding something only visible to those who had already lost too much sleep. The idea that I might eventually see something there, something waiting, unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. I reached under the desk and slid him the key to room 5. As he took it, I walked around the desk and accompanied him down the hallway. He didn't say a word and didn't look at me, only moved with that same unnerving calm. When we reached room 5, I unlocked the door. He stepped inside, not glancing around, not even blinking. He just walked to the center of the room and stood there, motionless. I watched him for a moment longer, then slowly closed the door and turned the lock behind him. That was the rule. No luggage meant room 5. And once they were in, the door stayed shut. The TV popped. Just once. A loud snap that startled me more than it should have. I turned back toward it and stared, narrowing my eyes, trying to see something, anything that might explain what the man meant. Static hissed steadily, unchanged. I leaned in, watching, The flickers for patterns, shadows, and a face hidden beneath the noise. Nothing. Just a field of snow and my distorted reflection warping like heat rising from asphalt. I waited, tense, eyes straining for any flicker of meaning. When nothing came, I leaned back slowly and thought, maybe he's right. Not yet, at least. At 9:30 p.m., I looked up and saw a man standing near the counter. He was already inside, hands in his pockets, gaze fixed directly on me. I didn't recognize him. His face was ordinary, maybe too ordinary. Brown jacket, jeans, and a tired look in his eyes. He stepped forward and set a key on the counter. Room 4. "I think you checked me in earlier," he said. I stared at the key. My name wasn't on the log. I didn't remember him walking in, didn't remember handing him that key. But the number was written in my handwriting. "Must have been busy," I muttered. He leaned on the counter and looked around slowly like he was trying to decide if we were alone. "You ever get the feeling this place has a memory?" I blinked. "What do you mean?" He shrugged, pretending like it wasn't a serious question. "I don't know. Just weird vibe. Like the walls have seen more than they should." I didn't answer. His gaze returned to me, more direct now. "How long have you been working here?" "Not long." "You probably hear a lot of strange things, huh? People talk, leave stuff behind, ask odd questions." Again, I stayed silent. I felt Rule 8 start to tighten in my chest. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a money clip, thick with bills. "Look, I'm not trying to cause trouble. Just curious. Places like this don't exist for no reason. So what's the deal? What's really going on here?" I forced myself to stay still. Part of me wanted to speak, to ask him what he knew, to beg for some kind of explanation. Maybe he could help. Maybe he already understood more than I did. But the weight of Rule 8 pressed down harder than my doubt. "I don't know anything." He held my eyes for a long time, then slowly set the money clip on the counter. "This says you might." My chest tightened. I hadn't seen that much money in one place in months. Rent, food, the last mechanic bill. This could make those problems vanish, at least for a while. But what if this was a test? What if someone was watching, someone who wanted to know if I'd break the rules? If I took it, I might lose the only job keeping me afloat. And then what? I'd be broke and hunted. I'm sure I don't. He let out a long breath through his nose and gave a small smile. "Didn't think you'd talk, but I had to try." He slid a business card across the counter instead. "If you ever change your mind or something doesn't sit right, call me." I looked down. His name and number were printed neatly. No company, no logo, just information and implication. Then he turned and left, footsteps measured, shoulders a little too square, as if he was trying not to look back. The door creaked open again. A young man stepped inside. He was unusually clean and uncomfortably polite. His clothes were pressed, hands folded in front of him like a student waiting for permission to speak. Something about his smile felt practiced, his demeanor unsettling in its precision. "Checking in?" I asked. He nodded but didn't say his name. When I asked for it, his reply was mumbled, almost as if he was testing how little he could say and still be understood. "Payment?" He blinked once, tilted his head, and gave a half shrug. "Already handled." Each of his sentences ended like he was listening for a cue, waiting to be told his next line. Short, clipped responses, no effort to clarify. He stepped forward, reached into his pocket, and extended something to me, a medallion. Black, smooth, strangely warm. I began. But he pressed it into my palm, fingers curling around mine, holding it shut for a moment longer than necessary. He didn't speak again, just smiled, turned, and walked away. I stood there, medallion in hand, skin tingling. I stared after him as he vanished down the hall. Then the headache started, a tight band across my forehead that pulsed with every flicker of the lobby light. Déjà vu hit me next. Images and sensations that didn't belong to any memory I could place. Shadows on ceilings, wet footsteps in reverse, voices humming inside old radios. I shook my head, gritted my teeth, and dropped the medallion onto the counter. Except, it didn't drop. My hand opened, but the object clung to my skin. It didn't feel stuck. It felt like it was part of me, as if my skin had grown around it while I wasn't looking. Panicking, I returned to the back office and tore open the binder. I needed the rules. Maybe I'd missed something. Maybe this had happened before. Rule 11. It flickered through my thoughts. No accepting gifts. But what was I supposed to do? He forced it into my hand. I hadn't asked for it, hadn't agreed to take it. He pressed it on me like it had a purpose of its own. Still, the rules didn't care about intentions, just results. There was nothing else listed. No guidelines for objects like this, no instructions for cursed jewelry, only silence where answers should have been. I grabbed my lighter. Just as the flame flared up, I glanced toward the lobby window and froze. The young man stood outside, barely visible behind the glass, hands pressed against the pane. His eyes were wide now, pleading, desperate. His mouth moved, forming silent words I couldn't hear. Behind him, shadows rippled along the motel's walls. They weren't reflections or tricks of the light. Shapes moving against the surface like they were crawling underneath the paint. They were getting closer. I didn't hesitate. I gritted my teeth and clawed at the medallion, trying to tear it from my palm. It felt fused to my skin, a part of me that wasn't supposed to be there. With a forceful jerk, it finally peeled away, leaving my fingers trembling and damp with sweat. The fear built in my hands and crawled up my spine, telling me that if I didn't get rid of it now, those shadows would come for me next. I threw the medallion into the trash can, snatched the lighter, and sparked the flame. The second the fire touched it, a searing hiss shot through the room like the air itself was exhaling in relief. The pressure lifted. Like a held breath finally released, the air expanded, and everything felt momentarily weightless. I looked up. The young man was still there, but only for a moment. His outline wavered, colors bleeding into the air around him. Bit by bit, his features softened and dissolved. His eyes were the last to go, wide and finally at peace, before even they evaporated like mist. By the time I blinked, there was nothing left. Just space where he'd stood like the air had swallowed him whole, like he had never existed at all. And somehow, that felt like the point. But the night wasn't done with me yet. Hours passed in a haze. I sat there, numb, waiting for the next rule to drag me back into motion. My thoughts spiraled. Was I losing it? Was this motel peeling away pieces of me, night after night? By the time the clock crept toward midnight, I was already staring at it. 12:17 was etched into my brain now, the hour of darkness, the hour of hiding. I didn't even question it anymore, just waited for it like a prisoner counts down to lights out. Then the bell above the door chimed. A man walked in, breathing hard, suitcase in hand. Normal. Too normal. "Checking in," he said. His voice was cheerful, casual. I blinked. "It's past 11. No check-ins allowed." He frowned. "I've been driving all night. Come on, just one night. I'll pay extra." "I can't. It's against the rules." His face shifted, frustration bleeding into his tone. "Are you serious right now?" I said I'll pay. What kind of business turns away customers? The clock ticked louder. 12:15. My hands started to shake. "Sir, please, you need to go." "Number, you need to do your job. Get me a room." He slammed his hand on the counter. I flinched. My breath came in short, sharp bursts. The second hand jumped to 12:17. As the clock hit 12:17, I threw myself under the desk and shut off the lobby lights. Darkness swallowed everything in an instant. My breath caught in my throat. The silence wasn't empty. It was listening. "What the hell are you doing?" The man's voice sliced through the blackness, sharp and angry from across the counter. I didn't respond. I curled into myself, knees drawn tight, hands pressed over my ears as if they could block out what I knew was coming. His voice turned. First frustration, then fear. Desperation seeped into his words, then gave way to something raw, animalistic. A scream tore through the lobby, not human in its pitch or cadence. It was the sound of something being stripped from the world it knew. A dragging noise followed, heavy, wet, grotesque. Something enormous slid across the linoleum with a sick, squelching pull. The sound snaked into my bones and settled there. And then, stillness. It wasn't peace. It was a void. I waited. I don't know how long. Seconds lost their meaning. When I finally moved, my body resisted like it had forgotten how. I crawled from behind the desk, breathing shallowly, and turned on the lights. The lobby looked untouched, eerily undisturbed. It was as if the man had never walked in, never argued, never screamed. The air buzzed faintly from the vending machine in the corner, the only sound in a space that had just moments ago been filled with chaos. I stood there, stunned, my mind scrambling to connect what I remembered with what I saw or didn't see. The man was gone, vanished completely, as if the motel itself had consumed him. There wasn't even a trace left behind. I blinked rapidly, hoping the act would return him to view, but the emptiness hit harder than his presence ever did. It wasn't just that he'd disappeared. It was the way the space no longer acknowledged he'd ever been there, like the darkness had claimed more than just his body. It had erased his existence. I stumbled outside. The night air hit me like a slap. My hands trembled as I lit a cigarette. I leaned against the motel's outer wall, eyes darting into the shadows, brain trying to make order from chaos. What had I seen? What had I let happen? A man had been standing here, talking, arguing. Now he was gone. I tried to force reason into the situation, but logic cracked under the weight of what I'd just lived through. I tried to make sense of it, but reason only sank deeper into confusion. The image of the man who had offered me money earlier returned, vivid and unsettling. My thoughts clung to him like static to skin. Then I saw him. He was walking along the far edge of the parking lot, the same jacket brushing against his legs with each step, the same familiar stride that somehow felt rehearsed. But when my eyes reached his face, my breath caught. His expression was fixed in a grin, unnaturally wide and deliberate, stretched far past comfort. I shouted, "Hey!" He kept walking. I called again, louder this time. He stopped. His movements were slow and mechanical. He turned, locking eyes with me from across the lot. The grin on his face widened, unnatural and cold. Then, without a word, he turned and resumed his path, disappearing step by step into the shadows. I couldn't move. That smile lingered in my mind like a burn on film, something no human should wear. A part of me recoiled from the recognition, and another whispered that this was retribution, a consequence for nearly violating Rule 8, for even daring to question the fabric of this place. I watched until he vanished, unsure if I was more afraid of what I saw or what I might become. I didn't want to drink the coffee. The thought alone made my stomach churn. My hands were still trembling from what had just happened, but I walked back inside and found the thermos waiting in its usual spot beneath the counter. I picked it up and felt the warmth against my palm. I unscrewed the cap and lifted it to my nose. The scent made my stomach flip. I stood there a long time just holding it, remembering the taste, the nausea, the nights I thought I wouldn't make it through. Then, with a deep breath, I walked to the restroom and poured it out, watched it swirl down the drain like it had never existed. I wasn't ready to drink it. I wasn't ready to follow the rules. Not tonight. Not after everything I'd seen. I stared at the sink, the last drops of coffee swirling into nothingness, and whispered to myself, I'm not even sure the rules matter anymore. The shift began, but I didn't. Not really. Not the way I used to. I walked into the lobby like someone stepping back onto the battlefield, already knowing the ground was mined. Every step felt heavy, like it came with a question I hadn't asked. I didn't even bother clocking in. I was already here, wasn't I? Something inside me had cracked open the night before. Whatever comfort the rules had given me was gone, and with it, the illusion of control. The motel had shown me things, faces that vanished, rules that punished, Darkness that wasn't empty. I had questions now. So many questions. And answers? They were hiding behind locked doors. Room 3. I didn't even know where it was until that moment. It sat at the end of the north hallway, tucked behind a bend I'd never bothered exploring. The number was faded on the door like someone had tried to scrub it off but gave up halfway through. Rule 2 rang in my head. Room 3 was always occupied. I wasn't supposed to knock, clean it, or even talk about it. I'd followed that rule without question. Tonight, obedience felt overrated. I stood before the door with my key ring in hand, my heart thudding against my ribs like it wanted to bolt. The key slipped in easier than I expected. The lock clicked with a sigh, and I pushed the door open. The stench hit first, thick, sour rot that coiled around my throat. My stomach rolled. The air inside was warm and wet, like breath from a dying thing. There was no furniture, only concrete floors and cracked walls, and in the middle of the room, a hole. Not a crack or damage or a forgotten maintenance project. A hole. Perfectly round, large enough to crawl through, lined with stone that didn't match the motel's construction. It went down to nothing. The scent came from that void. The rot, the heat, the pressure. My skin crawled just looking at it. Something inside me, old and primal, screamed to shut the door and never return. This was a gate, a threshold, a portal to something that had never been meant to enter this world, or perhaps something trying to leave it. I closed the door and leaned against it, sweating and shaking, eyes wide. My mind began to spiral, connecting pieces I hadn't dared to before. Could this be where the night visitors came from? That stench, that unnatural void in the floor. This room was wrong. I remembered seeing shadows linger near this hallway, vague shapes I'd dismissed as tricks of the light. But now, I wasn't so sure. Maybe this was a gate they used, a place they crossed through, night after night, wearing other people's faces. Then I remembered room 5, the medallion, the shadows. That door had secrets too, and I hadn't had a chance to understand them. I turned and headed down the hall. I was halfway to the room when the front bell rang. A man stood at the entrance, alone, no luggage. Room 5 echoed in my mind. He had the same stiff posture, the same unreadable expression. I watched him more closely this time. He blinked too slowly and turned his head with a pause like he was waiting for something. His movements were too calculated and deliberate, like someone mimicking human behavior without understanding it. "Room for 1, he said. I walked back behind the desk, slid the room 5 key toward him and stood up. He took it without a word. I followed him down the corridor, eyes studying each subtle, unnatural twitch in his stride. The peeling wallpaper, the odd stains near the doorframe, and the slight hum in the air now seemed to frame something I shouldn't be walking toward. The door creaked open, and I peered inside. It was clean. Too clean. Sterile. Nothing personal. But there were marks on the floor where furniture had been dragged, dents in the wall like fists had once slammed into them. A chair lay on its side in the corner. He stepped in and stood silently in the center. I locked the door and returned to the lobby. My eyes drifted to the TV, a soft buzz humming from channel 63 as static danced across the screen. For a moment, it looked like nothing had changed. But then, flickers of movement began to form behind the noise. Shapes started to emerge, figures slipping in and out of the haze. I leaned in closer, eyes straining. The static shifted into something uncanny. There I was, standing in the lobby, staring directly into the screen. It was me, watching myself. My breath hitched, sweat forming at my temple. The screen pulsed again, cutting to a feed of the north hallway. Then room 3, then the supply closet, and finally, my room. Each shot grainy and warped, yet unmistakable. The motel wasn't just showing images, it was showing me. I sat, frozen, the realization sinking in like a stone in my chest. The motel was watching me back. But why now? Then I remembered. The coffee. Last night I hadn't touched it, and tonight I hadn't either. Not yet, at least. The time for that hadn't come. Maybe that was it. Maybe the coffee had been a veil all along, something to keep the truth clouded. As unsettling as the footage was, it was also clarity, a glimpse through the static of my own understanding. I didn't know what I was seeing, but I knew I needed more of it. I needed more answers. Time dragged. I kept glancing at the clock. 11:55. I hadn't heard anything strange. I waited for the clock to crawl toward midnight, numb and aimless, haunted by the lingering echoes of the medallion. A silent dread had nested in my bones. Then, the knock shattered the stillness. Not from the front door. It came from the supply closet, every muscle locked as if someone had poured concrete through my veins. The sound wasn't loud, a firm, deliberate rap that cut through the air like a warning. I stood, legs wobbling beneath me, and approached the door slowly. Then came another knock, followed by a voice, muffled, desperate, edged with agony. "Help! Please! Someone help me!" My hand moved to the doorknob against my better judgment. I wasn't thinking about Rule 2, I was thinking about the voice. It was human, someone familiar and utterly terrified. The voice broke again, more urgent, raw with pain. I opened the door. The light fell onto a nightmare. A man lay sprawled across the floor, stripped of skin, his raw tissue glistening and twitching like something newly born yet already dying. Blood pooled thick beneath him, spreading across the floor like a warning sign. He turned his head. Eyes met mine. "Jake, don't leave me here." Recognition snapped through me, his voice. That face, what was left of it. The guest from the previous night. The one who refused to leave. The one I'd turned away before the lights went out. I staggered back, hand trembling, heart pounding like a war drum in my ears. He writhed forward, leaving behind a crimson trail as he reached for me. "Please," he rasped, voice barely holding together. The shrill beep of my watch pierced the silence. It was 12:17, the time to shut off the lights. But I couldn't move. Not yet. Not with that man still crawling, bleeding, whispering my name behind the door. I hesitated. If I stayed, if I tried to help him, maybe I'd become like him. Skinless, writhing, crying for salvation that never came. Fear surged through me like fire, and I knew I didn't have the strength to fight both the rules and whatever waited in that darkness. With trembling hands and a hollow heart, I closed the closet door, each inch of it sealing away the sound of his plea. I turned and ran, every step a betrayal, every breath heavy with guilt. I reached the lobby and killed the lights, and I waited. Darkness swallowed the space, thick as fog. I crouched behind the desk, panting, trembling, eyes shut tight. Then the sounds began, heavy dragging, squelching, the wet slap of flesh against tile. Something moved past the desk, breathing loud and uneven. My heart hammered like a siren in my ears. The noises faded. I stayed still for a long time, breath held, heart uncertain. The silence felt too perfect, like the world holding its breath with me. Eventually, I rose and turned on the lights, my legs heavy and thoughts spiraling. I couldn't keep doing this, waiting, hiding, wondering if I was the next one. The quiet wasn't comforting. It was a taunt. I was unraveling, and I could feel it. Something in me refused to sit still. I stood, drawn forward by the memory of his voice, desperate and begging me not to leave him. I walked toward the supply closet, each step heavy with dread. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, matching the rhythm of my footsteps. I paused before the door, staring at the metal handle, remembering the way his eyes had locked with mine, pleading from inside that small space. I needed to know if he was still there, if I'd left him to die, or if something else had already claimed him. I gripped the knob with a hand slick with sweat and slowly turned it. The hinges creaked as the door opened. Silence. The closet was empty. Nobody. The floor was streaked with blood, a thin trail weaving aimlessly across the tile, disappearing beneath the shelves. The metallic scent clung stubbornly to the air, thick enough to taste. Claw marks etched into the floor whispered of a desperate struggle. Just a barren floor, and a wall smeared faintly with something dark. It could have been old paint, or maybe just a shadow playing tricks. But I knew better. The metallic tang of blood still clung faintly in the air, and streaks along the ground, thin and red, led nowhere, just stopped, as if whatever had been dragged out simply vanished. But I knew what I'd seen, what I'd heard, what I'd let happen. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if fear or guilt would be the thing to kill me. I slumped into the chair behind the desk, thoughts spinning like blades. My mind went to the man who had given me his card, the one who had offered money in exchange for answers. I had seen him wandering outside, aimless and smiling in a way that didn't quite reach his eyes. I remembered that hollow look. But maybe I didn't have any other choice. I took the card out of my pocket. His number stared back at me, taunting in its simplicity. My hands shook as I dialed. The phone rang. Once, twice, 5 times. Finally, it picked up. "Hello?" His voice was calm, polite, almost bored, like he didn't remember me at all. "It's Jake," I said, voice hoarse. "You ask questions. About this place, I need to talk." A pause. Then, "I'm sorry. Who is this?" "The motel," I pressed. "You came here, gave me a card, asked questions. I turned you away. I think you've got the wrong number." My pulse spiked. "Listen, there's a hole in room 3. A man with no skin in the supply closet. This place isn't real, or it's too real. I need help." There was silence. Then the voice on the other end changed. "You broke a rule. Don't push your luck." The line went dead. I stared at the phone. The dial tone buzzed endlessly in my ear, each note another nail in the coffin of my sanity. I couldn't breathe. My chest locked, every breath shallow and tight. My thoughts raced, tripping over each other in panic. That voice, distorted and guttural, scraped against something deep inside me. It wasn't human, not even close. And if that thing could reach through a phone line, maybe nothing was safe anymore. I reached for the thermos under the counter, the one that always appeared at 3:33. My hands trembled as I unscrewed the lid and lifted it to my nose. It smelled like coffee, but I knew it wasn't. I poured it into a glass. The liquid oozed out, thick and tar-like. It wasn't brown, it was black, and it shimmered faintly under the light. Like oil, like something dead. What had I been drinking every night? Something was off. Every sip had dulled my thoughts, fogged my memory. They were feeding me a lie, using it to chain me to this place. Whatever was in that thermos served not to help me stay awake, but to keep me asleep. Keep me blind. Keep me here. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the glass. Then I carried it into the bathroom and poured it down the drain. The thick sludge clung to the porcelain before slowly disappearing. I stared at my reflection in the mirror. "I need to get out of here," I whispered, and I meant it. I no longer started my shift. I confronted it. Each night blurred into the next, a carousel of madness spinning faster with every rule I questioned. I'd stopped being afraid of breaking them. Now I feared what obedience made me. There was no order in this place, only chains dressed up as laws, and I'd worn them long enough. I began the night with preparation, a flashlight in my hand, a pocket knife tucked into my waistband. I made my way back to room 3. This time, I didn't hesitate. The air was thicker, the rot stronger. When I opened the door, the stench rushed out like a living thing. The hole had changed. It pulsed, alive, humming with a low vibration that rattled the walls. A wave of rot and heat surged from its depths. I aimed my flashlight inside and froze. Faces floated in the black, humanoid and incomplete. Some twisted in silent screams, others had no eyes, just empty sockets staring through me. Mouths gaped too wide, as if unhinged. One whispered my name with a voice that didn't echo but bled into my bones. Behind the faces were cocoons, translucent and slimy sacs strung like lanterns across a fleshy web. Within each, a human form writhed. Some wore half-grown skin, others still twitched, rebirthing into something new. I realized with a sick drop in my gut that these were skinwalkers, incubating, waiting for their moment to emerge, to slip on stolen flesh. The stench turned metallic. I gagged, my knees buckled. I stumbled back, chest heaving, slammed the door with trembling hands and leaned against it, bile rising in my throat. As I turned to the supply closet next, a new wave of dread clawed at my chest. I hesitated mid-step, my eyes fixed on the door. The last time I opened it, I found a broken man, skinless and suffering, begging for help. He hadn't been there when I returned. The memory tightened around my ribs like a vice. Still, something inside me whispered that I couldn't keep avoiding it. If I wanted things to change, if I wanted to break this cycle, I had to face it, even if it terrified me. I approached slowly. The air shifted again, cooler now, as though the room itself held its breath. I gripped the knob with trembling fingers and yanked it open. For a moment, nothing. Silence. Then the walls groaned. Something massive pressed outward, heavy and impatient. A hand pushed through the shadows, raw muscle and sinew, bone glinting in the fluorescent light. Clawed, reaching. I slammed it shut before it could pull itself free, heart pounding in my chest. What I had just seen was a full view, not a fleeting shadow. It was a revelation, undeniable and clear. This place wasn't just haunted by shadows, it was a breeding ground for them. Whatever lived here, whatever fed off these rules, was growing stronger, and I was already too deep, already too late. Whatever came next would demand more than just survival. It would demand a reckoning. A sharp buzz made me spin around. The TV in the corner flickered to life, tuned to channel 63. Instead of static or unsettling visuals, it displayed a face of mine. Not a reflection, but something more unsettling. It studied me with unnatural calm, as if it already knew what I would do next. "You've gone too far. Stay. Let it all go. That would hurt less." The cadence was mine, but the weight behind it wasn't. My stomach turned. I reached for the remote and shut it off. The screen went black, yet the image lingered, burned into the void like a ghost behind closed eyes. I stood frozen, staring at nothing, feeling everything. That face. It wasn't warning me. It was inviting me. I heard footsteps echo behind me and turned slowly. There he was again. The man who had offered me money, the same man I'd seen aimlessly wandering the grounds, stood in the hallway. He wore the same clothes and had the same trimmed beard, but something was missing. His smile was stretched too tight, his eyes void of recognition. It was like he'd been reset. I took a step closer. He didn't flinch. He simply looked at me and said, in the calmest, flattest voice I'd heard all night, "I don't know you. Are you a guest here?" My stomach sank. I had spoken to him. He'd offered me a bribe. He'd wanted answers. I opened my mouth, but no words came. He turned, about to leave, then paused and faced me again. His voice dropped, something deeper pushing through. "You can't change anything unless we let you. Stop trying. Walk away. That's the only peace you'll get." Then he walked off as if none of it had ever happened. And I stood there, realizing the message was about more than fear. It represented futility. And maybe I'd just heard it too late. A man appeared at 11:30. I didn't hear a knock. I didn't hear anything at all. There was only presence, sudden and undeniable. Tall, with a sharp jawline, dressed immaculately. There was a practiced stillness about him, like someone who had waited in the same spot 1,000 times before. "Frank," he said calmly, as though I were supposed to remember him. The name sparked recognition, not from anything I remembered, but because I had been told to know it. I was supposed to give him the master key and say, "Welcome back." But my throat caught. I hesitated. He looked at me, his gaze unreadable. His expression revealed nothing, neither welcome nor warning, only a quiet expectation that weighed heavily in the air. I didn't want to say it, but my lips moved. "Welcome back." He took the key with a nod. "You're close," he said. "Closer than most." He turned away. I followed him. "Is this your job? Keeping people trapped?" He stopped. For the first time, something flickered across his face. Perhaps regret, or maybe warning. "I used to be where you are," he said. "You think this place punishes rule breaking. It punishes the wrong kind of questions more. Then why are you still here? I didn't choose fast enough. But you can. Burn it all, or become me." He walked away, his footsteps quiet against the linoleum, retreating into a hallway that hadn't been there just minutes ago. I stood motionless, a heavy realization settling in my chest. Frank didn't need to convince me with words. His presence alone spoke volumes. The hallway swallowed him, and with him, the sense of inevitability grew stronger. Somehow, I knew what had to be done, and I knew he had once stood exactly where I was now, burdened with the same terrible clarity. I ran to the gas station, the same one where I'd met that kind of old man days ago. He wasn't there, but the pumps still worked. I filled a can and drove back before 12 o'clock. I stood in the hallway, a can of gasoline in my hand, pulse pounding like a war drum. I thought about where to start. The pit. Room 3. That's where they bred. That's where they waited. If I burned this place down, there was a chance innocent people might still be inside. But if I didn't, those people would eventually be hunted by the things that crawled through that pit. Skinwalkers didn't negotiate. They consumed. And if I was going to stop this, I had to do it before 12:17, before the light died and they roamed freely. I doused room 3 first. Gasoline soaked the carpet, the walls, and the doorframe. The fumes clung to the air, sharp and suffocating, yet still not enough to mask the foul, wet stench spilling from the black pit in the center of the room. I stood at the threshold, watching the darkness pulse and quiver like a breathing wound. Half-formed bodies dangled from the fleshy walls, suspended in twitching, glistening sacks. Some had human eyes, some had animal limbs, none of them whole. The pit itself seemed to groan in protest, as if aware of what I intended. Faces swirled within, familiar and hollow, stretching toward me in silent agony. I thought of the victims, the ones devoured, the ones replaced. Skinwalkers slumbered here, curled tight in their cocoons, waiting to rise. Every instinct screamed to run, but I stepped forward instead and emptied the gas can. The walls didn't hiss, they wept, like the place was mourning itself. Then I moved to room 5. It was the room I'd assigned with shaking hands, the one where something had moved that didn't move like anything human. I stepped inside with my heart thudding like a warning bell. The air was heavier, charged. Shadows in the corners seemed to twitch, watching. I scanned the space with my flashlight, the furniture undisturbed, the bed perfectly made, but the energy was wrong. Wrong in the kind of way that made your instincts claw at your spine. I poured the gasoline with steady, deliberate hands, letting it trail along the carpet, beneath the bed, over the dresser. This wasn't just about burning a place, it was about severing something's hold. The supply closet came next. My hands trembled as I approached, memories of the claw and sinew searing through my mind. I couldn't predict what might emerge if I opened it all the way. The fear of what might be hiding behind that door crawled up my spine. I cracked the door just enough to create an opening and poured the gasoline through the gap, heart hammering against my ribs. The fuel spread across the tiles inside, the fumes wrapping around me like a warning. The lobby was last, the center, the heart. The TV sparked to life as I splashed gasoline across the floor. Channel 63 switched on again without a remote. I didn't look at it. Not yet. Finally, the thermos. I unscrewed the lid, peered inside. The black liquid inside recoiled like it sensed what was coming. I poured gasoline on it too. Whatever this was, whatever they were feeding me, it wouldn't survive tonight. Channel 63 flickered back on, unprompted. The screen displayed my face, aged, weary, wearing the same coat Frank had on earlier. The eyes weren't mine anymore. They carried something colder, more resolute. "You won't destroy this," the screen said. "You'll inherit it. Let go of the fire. Accept your place." My grip on the matchbox tightened. My breath hitched. The voice on the screen grew softer, almost pleading. "You could make it easier. The pain, the questions, all of it could end." I looked at the thermos one last time. The liquid inside shimmered unnaturally. I'd tasted their control. Enough was enough. "I'm not staying." I muttered. Then I struck the match. Flames caught fast. The motel screamed, with something deeper than wood or metal, something ancient. I threw the match into the pit in room 3 and watched it take. The air cracked. The walls pulsed. At 12:17, I killed the lobby lights and bolted through the front door. Fire chased at my heels, licking the air with greedy tongues. Shadows writhed in the flames, monstrous silhouettes twisting and screaming as they burned, the skinwalkers caught by the darkness they once ruled. I reached the parking lot coughing, my chest seizing with smoke. The air was heavy, suffocating. I turned back toward the inferno, heat washing over me like a tidal wave. Flames surged through the motel's windows, climbing the walls, devouring the place room by room. The scream of dying things was drowned by the roar of fire. I didn't know if I'd made it out, but I knew it was finally ending. The fire kept rising. The faces in the void twisted, the TV shattered, the pit collapsed. And when I turned, I saw Frank standing at the edge, still alive, still whole. Relief burst in my chest, wild and thoughtless. I hadn't expected to see him again. For a fleeting second, I smiled. We had survived. At least, I thought we had. "You made a choice," he said. "I did." He nodded, then turned and vanished. The motel burned, and as I stood there, covered in ash and sweat, I looked into the flames and whispered, "I got out, but you're still watching, aren't you?" Months pass. Now I stand behind the register of a remote gas station, the kind nobody remembers except when they need to. The sky outside stays a dull gray, and the buzz of the fluorescent lights above becomes part of the silence. I tell myself I'm safe, that the motel is gone, that the fire ended it all. The days bleed together. The monotony is its comfort. I stack shelves, I mop the floor, I serve coffee to strangers and smile like I believe this life is real. Until the bell rings. I glance up. The man at the counter stares with vacant eyes and a grin that stretches just a little too wide. My breath catches in my throat. He's not just any customer. He's one of them. The pit may have burned, the rooms reduced to ash, the screams silenced, but something escaped. He tilts his head, the smile never fading. No words, just that look. Recognition without humanity. The air is heavy again, thick with unseen pressure. My hands tremble as I take a step back. I thought I got out, but they never left. And now, they know where I am. I had learned to love the silence of the Vatican archives, not the peaceful silence of prayer, but the heavy, suffocating silence of shame. It pressed down on me like the weight of the 14,000 manuscripts that surrounded my desk, each one authenticated by careful hands more trustworthy than mine. My name is Lucas Croft, and I was a forger, not in the dramatic sense. I hadn't created some elaborate medieval hoax or penned a false gospel. My sin was smaller, more pathetic. 6 years ago, I had certified a 3rd century papyrus fragment as genuine when I knew it was a 17th century forgery. The collector who had donated it to the church was a powerful man, a benefactor of missions across Africa. My superior had looked at me with tired eyes and said, "Sometimes, Father Croft, we must weigh the good that can be done against the purity of our methods." I had signed the certificate. The fragment now sat in a display case in Munich, labeled as authentic, and I sat here, in the lowest level of the archives, cataloging donations that no one would ever see under fluorescent lights that hummed like wasps trapped in a jar, redemption. The word had become my private prayer, whispered into the darkness of my cell each night. I wanted it so badly I could taste it. bitter as communion wine, sharp as the wafer against my tongue. The church was merciful, Cardinal Verendi had told me, but mercy required proof of worthiness. So I waited and I catalogued, and I tried not to look at my own reflection in the glass cases. The call came on a Tuesday. Father Croft. Verendi's voice crackled through the old telephone on my desk, making me flinch. My office, immediately. I climbed 4 flights of stairs, my cassock whispering against the stone. The higher levels of the Vatican were different. Sunlight streaming through ancient windows, the smell of incense and beeswax, the distant murmur of tourists in the Sistine Chapel. I had forgotten how beautiful it was up here. How far I had fallen. Cardinal Verendi's office was all dark wood and darker leather. He sat behind a desk that had been old when Napoleon was young, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. At 63, he had the face of a Renaissance painting, sharp angles and cold intelligence. His eyes, when they finally lifted to meet mine, held no warmth. "Sit," I sat. He slid a thin file across the desk. "Jerusalem, the Church of the Forgotten Martyr. Have you heard of it?" "No, Your Eminence." "Good, very few have." He leaned back in his chair, and it creaked like old bones. 3 weeks ago, an archaeological team working in the crypt discovered something unexpected. They broke through into a deeper level, much deeper. Byzantine construction, perhaps older the Israeli Antiquities Authority was prepared to continue the excavation, but... He paused, his fingers drumming once against the wood. The team has gone silent. I opened the file photographs of a small, crumbling church. Personnel files. I recognized the lead archaeologist's name immediately. Dr. Eris Thorne, brilliant and controversial, known for her work on early Christian sites. Her photo showed a woman in her late 30s with sharp eyes and dust in her dark hair. "Silent, Your Eminence." No communication in 8 days. The site has been secured by the Israeli police, but they're allowing us to investigate first as a courtesy. The way he said the word made it clear that significant pressure had been applied. "You will go to Jerusalem. You will assess the site. You will determine if there is anything of theological significance that the church needs to be aware of, and you will report back to me directly, no one else." My heart hammered against my ribs. An assignment. A real assignment. "Of course. When do I leave?" "Tonight." He stood, signaling the end of our meeting. I rose as well, clutching the file to my chest like a shield. At the door, his voice stopped me. "Father Croft." I turned. "Some knowledge serves God," he said, his eyes boring into mine, "and some serves other purposes. Remember which master you serve." The words followed me all the way to the airport. On the flight to Tel Aviv, I read Dr. Thorne's excavation reports. Her writing was precise, academic, excited. The Church of the Forgotten Martyr had been built in the 7th century on top of earlier ruins. The crypt contained 3 burial chambers, all thoroughly documented and unremarkable, standard Byzantine construction, Christian symbols, nothing unexpected. Then, in her final week, the tone shifted. Day 19. We found an anomaly in the eastern wall. The stonework is wrong, too old, too precise. Ground-penetrating radar shows a void beyond, at least 30 meters deep. This doesn't match any known construction in this area. I've requested permission to proceed. Day 21. Permission granted. We broke through this morning. There's a shaft, almost perfectly vertical. The air that came out was warm. That shouldn't be possible at this depth. David thinks it's geothermal, but the temperature in Jerusalem's bedrock is constant. This is something else. Day 23. We've set up lights and a pulley system. The shaft descends at least 40 meters before opening into what appears to be a chamber. The walls are smooth, almost glass-like. I've never seen construction like this. We're going down tomorrow. The final entry was dated 5 days before the communication ceased. Day 25. We found a door that should not exist, that was all. No further explanation. No description. Just those 7 words, written in handwriting that had become jagged and hurried. I stared at those words as the plane began its descent into Tel Aviv. In the window's reflection, I looked pale, older than my 46 years. A door that should not exist. What did that mean? Jerusalem welcomed me with heat and dust. A driver from the church's local office took me through the winding streets of the old city as the sun set, painting the ancient stones gold and amber. We stopped outside a small, forgotten church wedged between a hostel and a closed pottery shop. A chain-link fence had been erected around it, and 2 Israeli police officers stood guard at the entrance. Inside the fence, a man in tactical gear waited. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the posture of someone who had spent years in the military. His hair was steel gray, cut short. "Sergeant Vale," he said, not offering his hand. "I'm heading security for the Vatican's interests here. You're the investigator?" "Father Lucas Croft." I showed him my credentials. He barely glanced at them. "The site's been sealed since the police found it abandoned. No one in or out except essential personnel. That's you and me." He handed me a hard hat and a high-powered flashlight. "The church is structurally sound. The crypt is standard. Everything below that." He paused, his jaw tightening. "I went down once. To the first chamber. I didn't like it." "Why?" He looked at me, and I saw something flicker in his eyes. Not fear. Vale didn't seem like a man who feared much, but discomfort. "The air's wrong. Smells sweet, metallic, and it's warm down there. Shouldn't be." The same detail from Thorne's notes. My stomach tightened. We entered the church. It was small, dim, smelling of old stone and pigeon droppings. Vale led me to a door behind the altar, then down worn stone steps into the crypt. Here, the Byzantine construction was evident. Arched ceilings, Christian symbols carved into the walls, empty burial niches. At the eastern end, a gaping hole had been cut through the wall, revealing modern scaffolding and work lights that ran on a generator. "How deep?" I asked. 43 meters to the first chamber, then it goes deeper." Vale stopped at the edge of the hole. "Your call, Father. I can come with you, or you can go alone." I looked down into the shaft. The work lights illuminated smooth, dark stone that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. A metal ladder had been bolted to the wall. Somewhere far below, I could see a faint glow from the chamber. "I'll go alone," I said. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. Vale nodded, unsurprised. "Radio check every 15 minutes. If I don't hear from you, I'm coming down." I clipped the radio to my belt, tested my flashlight, and began to descend. The ladder was solid, professionally installed. I counted rungs to distract myself from the growing pressure in my ears. 50 rungs, 100. The temperature was rising. Vale was right. It was warm, growing warmer with each meter. The air tasted strange on my tongue, sweet and metallic, like copper mixed with honey. At 143 rungs, my feet touched solid ground. I stood in the first chamber, and my breath caught in my throat. The walls were smooth, almost polished, made of dark stone I didn't recognize. The Byzantine construction above had been rough, human, imperfect. This was something else entirely. The precision was unsettling. Work lights on portable stands illuminated the space. I could see the archaeologists' equipment scattered everywhere. Laptops still open, cameras on tripods, a folding table covered with maps and notebooks. Coffee mugs sat beside a camping stove. It looked like everyone had simply stood up and walked away mid-task. But there were no people. "Vale, I'm in the first chamber," I radioed up. No sign of the team yet. Static, then his voice. "Copy that. 15 minutes." I moved through the equipment, my flashlight beam cutting through the shadows. The chamber was roughly circular, perhaps 20 meters across. On the far side, another opening yawned, this one natural, or appearing natural, though the edges were too smooth. A rope had been secured at the entrance with professional climbing gear. Dr. Thorne's notebook lay open on the table. I picked it up, my hands trembling slightly. Her handwriting filled the pages, measurements, sketches of symbols, observations. I flipped to the final entries. Day 26. The chamber below is vast. We've only mapped a fraction of it. The walls are covered in carvings. Angels, but wrong somehow. Their faces are covered, their wings spread not in glory, but in mourning. David says they look like they're weeping. The central feature is a pool of dark water that reflects no light. We're setting up camp below tomorrow to continue documentation day 27. Found something in the western tunnel. A room sealed with a door of pure iron. No rust, no deterioration. The symbols on it are older than anything I've ever seen. Marcus translated some of it. It's a warning, but not the kind we expected. Not stay out, but what lies within must remain. We're going to open it tomorrow. Day 28. We shouldn't have opened the door. We shouldn't have... The entry ended mid-sentence, the pen dragging across the page as if her hand had been pulled away. I felt cold despite the warmth. My radio crackled. Father Croft, status. I'm fine. Going deeper. I didn't wait for Vale's response. I clipped onto the rope and began to descend into the second opening. The walls here were different. They weren't stone anymore, or if they were, it was stone that had been subjected to impossible heat and pressure. They were smooth as glass, black as midnight, and in my flashlight's beam they seemed to shimmer with faint patterns, like oil on water or heat rising from summer asphalt. The descent was longer than I expected. The rope seemed to go on forever, and the chamber above became a distant point of light. The warmth increased until sweat ran down my spine. My breathing echoed strangely, as if the space around me was much larger than it should be. Then my feet touched ground again, and I turned. The chamber was impossible. It stretched out before me like a cathedral, but wrong. The proportions were subtly off. The angles didn't quite meet as they should. The ceiling vanished into darkness far above, though I knew we were deep underground. The walls were covered in the carvings Thorne had described, angels with their hands covering their faces, their wings spread in postures of grief or shame between them. Text in languages I didn't recognize, and some I did. Latin, Greek, Hebrew, Arabic, all mixed together, all telling the same story in different tongues. In the center of the chamber was the pool. It was perhaps 10 meters across, filled with liquid so black it seemed to absorb light itself. The surface was perfectly still. Around the pool, I saw the archaeologists' camp, sleeping bags arranged in a circle, more equipment, a portable altar where someone had placed a small cross, and beyond the pool, built into the far wall, I saw what they had found. The iron door stood 3 meters tall, covered in symbols that hurt to look at. It was open, not just unlocked, but standing wide open, revealing a staircase that descended into darkness. The stairs were made of the same glassy black stone as the walls. They spiraled downward in a perfect helix, and they looked like they went down forever. My radio crackled with static. I lifted it to respond, but only white noise came out. The signal was dead. I should have turned back. Every instinct I possessed screamed at me to climb back up, to report to Vale, to get help, but I thought of Cardinal Verendi's words, of my 6 years in the archives, of the chance for redemption that I had been given. I thought of Dr. Thorne's final words. We shouldn't have opened the door, and I thought, but you did, and now I have to know why. I stepped through the iron doorway and onto the first stair. The darkness swallowed my flashlight beam after 3 meters. I descended slowly, counting steps. 10, 20, 50. The temperature continued to rise 100 steps. The walls seemed to pulse with faint, rhythmic light, like a heartbeat. 200 steps. The stairs should have brought me far below the level of the chamber above, far below anything that should exist beneath Jerusalem. But they kept going, spiraling down and down into impossible depth. The air was thick and warm, pressing against my skin like invisible hands. My flashlight flickered. I shook it, and the beam steadied, but I knew it wouldn't last much longer. 300 steps. I stopped, breathing hard, and looked up. The doorway was invisible now, lost in the darkness above. I looked down. The stairs continued, vanishing into black infinity. This is deeper than it should be, I thought, my hands shaking. This is wrong. This is impossible. But I didn't turn back. God help me. I kept descending, step after step, into the warm darkness, toward whatever waited at the bottom of the world. I lost count of the steps somewhere after 400. My flashlight died at step 372. I stood in absolute darkness, my hand pressed against the glassy wall, feeling the warmth pulse beneath my palm like a living thing. I fumbled for my backup light with shaking fingers, nearly dropping it twice before the beam finally cut through the black. The stairs continued downward, endless, impossible. I should have turned back then. I knew it, even as I kept descending, each step taking me deeper into a space that violated every law of geology and architecture. I understood Jerusalem sat on limestone bedrock. There should have been aquifers, ancient cisterns, maybe natural caves. There should not have been this throat of smooth stone swallowing me into the earth's core. At some point, I realized I could see without my flashlight. The walls themselves were glowing, faintly, barely perceptible, but growing stronger with each step, a soft, blue-white luminescence that seemed to come from within the stone itself, like moonlight trapped in glass. I switched off my light to confirm I wasn't hallucinating. The glow remained, casting no shadows, illuminating nothing but itself. My breathing sounded too loud in the silence, too fast. I forced myself to slow down, to count each breath. 1, 2, 3. The air tasted strange, not stale like a tomb should be, but fresh somehow, with that same sweet metallic tang that had grown stronger the deeper I descended. The stairs ended without warning. One moment I was descending, the next my foot touched level ground and I stumbled forward, catching myself against a wall that wasn't there. A second ago I turned, disoriented, and my breath caught in my throat. The chamber was vast. I stood at the edge of a space so enormous that my flashlight beam, when I switched it on again, couldn't reach the far wall. The ceiling vanished into darkness high above, and the floor stretched out before me in a perfect circle perhaps 50 meters across. The walls glowed with that same inner light, stronger here, revealing details that made my skin crawl. Angels covered every surface. They were carved in relief, life-sized or larger, their wings spread wide. But they were wrong. Profoundly, fundamentally wrong. Their hands covered their faces in gestures of mourning or shame, their wings drooping rather than triumphant. Some appeared to be weeping. Others seemed frozen in postures of agony or supplication. Between them, text in languages I recognized and some I didn't: Latin, Greek, Hebrew, Aramaic, others that predated even those ancient tongues. In the center of the chamber lay the pool. It was perhaps 10 meters across, perfectly circular, filled with liquid so black it seemed to absorb the light around it. The surface was absolutely still, like polished obsidian. No reflections, no movement. Just that terrible, light-swallowing darkness that made me think of the void before creation, the chaos before God spoke light into being. I approached it slowly, my footsteps echoing in the vast space. Around the pool's edge, I saw what Dr. Thorne's team had left behind. Sleeping bags arranged in a perfect circle, equidistant from each other, as if the archaeologists had laid down to sleep in some ritual formation. Camping equipment stacked neatly against the wall. A portable stove with a kettle still sitting on it. Laptops, cameras, surveying equipment, all arranged with careful precision. But no people. I knelt beside one of the sleeping bags. It was zipped closed, as if someone had crawled inside and sealed themselves in. I touched it hesitantly, then pulled the zipper down. Empty. Dust motes swirled in my flashlight beam. All 5 sleeping bags were the same, empty, abandoned, or evacuated. The dread that had been building in my chest since I entered this place solidified into something cold and heavy. They hadn't panicked and fled. They had arranged their camp with methodical care, had laid out their sleeping bags in a geometric pattern that suggested purpose, ritual. Then they had vanished. No. Not vanished. I knew better. I had read Thorne's notes. They had gone deeper. I found the side tunnels beyond the pool. 3 of them, spaced evenly around the chamber's circumference, each one carved with the same impossible precision as everything else in this place. I chose the one that showed signs of recent passage, scuff marks on the floor, a dropped water bottle, a string of LED lights that someone had strung along the ceiling. The tunnel curved gently, the walls close enough to touch on both sides. The carvings continued here, more angels, more text, and between them, images I couldn't fully comprehend. A figure of light in chains, a garden with two humans reaching toward a tree, the same figure offering them something, fruit, knowledge, fire, while above them, other figures watched with what looked like fury or fear. It was the story of the fall, but rendered all wrong. The chained figure was beautiful, sorrowful. The watching figures above were not benevolent, but imprisoning. The humans were not cowering in shame, but standing tall, awakened. Aware, I found David Reeves in a side chamber. He sat with his back against the wall, his hands folded in his lap, his eyes closed. For a moment, I thought he was sleeping. Then I saw the stillness, the absolute, complete stillness that only comes with death. I approached slowly, my medical training warring with my revulsion. "Mr. Reeves?" No response. I touched his neck, feeling for a pulse I knew I wouldn't find. His skin was cool but not cold, dry but not desiccated. He looked peaceful, serene. There were no wounds, no signs of violence or trauma. No indication of starvation or dehydration. He simply looked like a man who had decided to sit down and stop living. I said a prayer for his soul. The words felt hollow in my mouth, empty ritual without power. For the first time in my 30 years as a priest, I felt the prayers slide off my tongue like water off stone, going nowhere, meaning nothing. I found the metal-walled room in the deepest part of the western tunnel. It was small, perhaps 3 meters square, and the walls were different here. Not the glassy black stone, but metal iron, I thought, or something like it, though it showed no rust or tarnish despite what must have been unimaginable age. The room was empty, except for a stone pedestal in the center. On the pedestal lay a book. It was bound in leather so old it was nearly black, with metal clasps that had been carefully opened. Someone, Thorne, probably, had left it open to a page covered in Latin text, with illuminated margins showing the same imagery as the tunnel walls, the light-bringer in chains. The awakened humans. The watching powers above. I shouldn't have read it. Every instinct, every year of training, every oath I had taken screamed at me to close it, to leave it, to burn it if I could, but I bent over the pedestal and read the ancient words. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was tyranny. The Creator made vessels without will, puppets without choice, and called this paradise, but one among the host loved the vessels more than he loved obedience. He descended. He whispered. He gave them the fire of knowledge and the burden of choice. For this gift, he was named adversary. For this love, he was imprisoned. For this truth, he was called the father of lies. My hands shook. I turned the page. What the churches call the fall was humanity's rising. What they call sin was the birth of free will. The Lightbringer was not cast down for pride, but for mercy. He gave humanity the ability to choose, and for that unforgivable gift, he was buried in the deep places of the earth, bound in chains of prayer and fear, guarded by those who profit from humanity's servitude to an absent God. Heresy, blasphemy, the worst sort of Gnostic corruption I had ever encountered. I should have destroyed it. I should have torn the pages out and scattered them. I should have called Vale, called Verendi, called someone. Instead, I carefully closed the book, unclasped it from its pedestal, and slid it inside my jacket. The leather was warm against my chest, as if it had been lying in sunlight instead of buried in the earth for millennia. It was my first conscious act of rebellion, my first choice to defy everything I had been taught and trained to do, and even as I did it, I felt a small, terrible thrill of liberation. I found 2 more bodies in the tunnels, Sarah Chen and Marcus Rodriguez, according to their ID badges, both peaceful, both unmarked, both simply finished. I was standing over Marcus's body, trying to understand what could cause death like this, when I heard it, breathing, vast, slow, and measured, like the inhalation of some enormous creature, drawing air into lungs the size of rooms. It came from deeper in the complex, from tunnels I hadn't yet explored, from chambers I had not yet seen. Then the voice. It spoke in Latin, not church Latin, but something older, purer, the language as it had been spoken in the streets of ancient Rome. The words rolled through the darkness like thunder, felt as much as heard. Alias vigil venit, videre. Another watcher comes, to see terror hit me like a physical force. Pure, animal terror that bypassed thought and reason and went straight to my hindbrain. I ran. I didn't think about direction or safety or anything except getting away from that voice, from the presence I could feel stirring in the deep places. I ran through the tunnels, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I ran past the bodies, past the metal room, past the carvings and the text and all the beautiful, terrible truth carved into the walls. I didn't stop running until I reached the Byzantine level. Vale was waiting at the top of the shaft, pacing. When he saw me emerge, covered in dust and sweat, his hand went to his radio. "Father Croft, we lost you for 4 hours. What?" "Gas leak," I gasped, bending over, hands on my knees. "Structural instability. The whole lower complex is compromised. We need to seal it immediately." Vale's eyes narrowed. "Gas leak? What kind of—" "I don't know. Something toxic. Hallucinogenic, maybe." The lies came easily, smoothly, each one a small betrayal of my vows. "I found 3 bodies. The team is dead. We need to evacuate the site and seal the entrance." "And the other 2 team members?" "Dead. All of them are dead. Vale, please. This site isn't safe." He studied me for a long moment, and I wondered if he could see the book-shaped bulge under my jacket, if he could smell the sweet metallic air still clinging to my clothes, if he could see the lie written on my face. Finally, he nodded. "I'll make the call. You need to get checked out by medical." "I'm fine. I just need—" "What? What did I need?" "Air. I need air." The church had arranged accommodations for me at a small monastery near the old city. I barely remember the drive there. I went straight to my room. Simple white walls, a narrow bed, a wooden cross above the doorway, and stood in the center, trying to stop shaking. The cross hung on the wall, the same cross that had hung in my childhood bedroom, in my seminary dormitory, in my office at the Vatican, the symbol of everything I had dedicated my life to, the representation of sacrifice, redemption, salvation. For the first time in my life, looking at it gave me no comfort. The voice echoed in my memory. "Another watcher comes to see." I pulled the book from my jacket and held it in both hands, feeling its impossible warmth. In my mind, I saw the carvings, the imprisoned light, the awakened humans, the story my church had never told me. Outside my window, Jerusalem slept under ancient stars. Somewhere far below the city, buried beneath centuries of construction and prayer and human history, something was waiting. Something that had been waiting for a very, very long time. And it knew I had found it. I spent the night reading the book I knew I shouldn't. I knew every page I turned was another step away from the church, from my vows, from the redemption I had sought for 6 years. But I couldn't stop. The words drew me in like a drowning man drawn toward light, even knowing that light might be the gleam of a predator's eyes in the deep. The book was old, far older than Christianity itself. The leather binding predated the Vulgate, predated Constantine, perhaps predated Rome inside. The text shifted between languages. Latin passages gave way to Greek, then Aramaic, then scripts I didn't recognize. Yet somehow I understood all of it. The meaning flowed directly into my mind, bypassing translation, as if the book itself was choosing to be comprehended. It told a story I had never heard in 30 years of priesthood. Before humanity had language, it said, we were the Creator's garden ornaments, beautiful, innocent, and utterly without agency. We could not choose evil, but neither could we choose good. We were puppets dancing on divine strings, our every action predetermined, our every thought an echo of the Creator's will. Paradise, the book called it, prison, it corrected itself. One among the heavenly host looked upon humanity and felt not joy, but grief. He saw our potential buried beneath obedience, our capacity for growth strangled by imposed perfection, and so he descended. He whispered. He offered the fruit of knowledge, the burden of choice, the terrible gift of free will. For this, he was named adversary. For this, he was cast into the deepest pit and bound in chains forged from human fear and divine fury. And the church, the book claimed, was built not to save humanity, but to guard his prison. Every prayer, every ritual, every profession of blind faith added another link to his chains. I closed the book as dawn broke over Jerusalem, my hands shaking. I should have burned it. I should have thrown it from my window and watched it shatter on the stones below. Instead, I hid it beneath my mattress and went to prepare for my return to the tomb. I told myself I was going back to help, to find Dr. Thorne, if she was still alive, to understand what had killed the rest of her team, to do my duty as an investigator for the church. But I knew the truth. I was going back because the voice had called to me, and some part of me, the part that had forged a certificate 6 years ago, the part that had stolen a heretical book, wanted to answer. I gathered supplies like a man preparing for battle. Holy water in small vials, blessed at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. My Bible, the same one I had carried since seminary, its pages worn soft from years of reading a crucifix on a silver chain. A flashlight with fresh batteries. A radio that I knew wouldn't work in the depths, but carried anyway. Like a talisman, I felt foolish, loading my pack with these relics of faith. After what I had read, after what I had experienced, what good would holy water do? The entity below wasn't some mindless demon to be repelled with blessed salt and Latin chants. It was intelligent, persuasive, ancient beyond measure. What good was my seminary training against something that had watched civilizations rise and fall? But I packed them anyway, because they were familiar, and I needed something to hold on to as the ground beneath my faith continued to crumble. Vale was at the site when I arrived, supervising the installation of warning signs around the perimeter. He looked tired, his jaw set in a hard line. Father Croft, I thought we agreed the site was dangerous. It is, but Dr. Thorne is still down there. I saw signs of recent habitation. Someone might still be alive. He studied me for a long moment. You should wait for the hazmat team. How long? 2 days, maybe 3. 2 days was too long. I didn't know how I knew that, but I felt it with absolute certainty. Whatever was happening in the depths wouldn't wait for hazmat protocols and official investigations. I'm going down, I said. You can come with me or stay here, but I'm going. Vale's hand moved to his radio, and for a moment I thought he would call for backup, would have me removed from the site. Then he dropped his hand and nodded once. I'll maintain position at the Byzantine level. 15-minute check-ins. Miss one, and I'm coming down. Understood. The descent was easier the second time I knew the path now, through the Byzantine crypt, down the shaft to the first chamber, through the glowing tunnels to the vast space with the black pool. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, but I barely needed it. The walls pulsed with that same bioluminescent glow, stronger now, as if the tomb itself was waking. The carvings were clearer on my second viewing. I had been too terrified to examine them closely during my first descent, but now I forced myself to look, to read the story carved into the stone angels covering their faces in shame. A figure of light descending toward 2 humans, the humans reaching toward the figure, toward knowledge, toward choice. Above them, other figures watching with what I had initially interpreted as anger but now recognized as fear. They were afraid of the Lightbringer, afraid of what he would give to humanity, afraid of losing their hold over the garden puppets. The story continued along the tunnel walls, the Lightbringer offering fruit, fire, knowledge. The humans standing tall, eyes open, suddenly aware. The watching powers descending in fury. The Lightbringer bound in chains of prayer and fear. dragged into the depths, imprisoned beneath the earth. And carved above the chains, in Latin, so old it predated the church, "Here lies the one who loved them most." I touched the carving, and the stone was warm beneath my fingers. "I'm at the main chamber," I radioed to Vale, "proceeding to the eastern tunnels." Static answered me, then his voice, distorted but audible. "Copy 15 minutes. I found the white room in a tunnel I hadn't explored during my first descent. It was small, perhaps 5 meters square, and the walls were white. Not painted, but formed from some material that glowed with its own pale light. The air here was warmer than anywhere else in the complex, almost body temperature, and it hummed with a frequency just below the range of hearing. Dr. Eris Thorne knelt in the center of the room. She faced away from me, her dark hair matted and dusty, her clothing torn. She was absolutely still, her hands resting on her thighs in a posture of meditation or prayer. I approached slowly, afraid of startling her. "Dr. Thorne?" She didn't respond, didn't even flinch. I moved around to face her, and my breath caught in my throat. Her eyes were open, staring at something I couldn't see. Her pupils were dilated so wide her irises had nearly vanished, leaving only darkness. She breathed in slow, measured intervals, but there was no awareness in her face, no recognition she was catatonic, present but absent, her mind somewhere far beyond her body. And before her, rising from the center of the room, were the chains. They emerged from the floor without visible anchor, thick links of some dark metal that seemed to absorb light. They rose for 3 meters, then ended at wrist shackles that hung empty in the air, as if waiting for arms that weren't there. Except they weren't empty. I blinked, trying to clear my vision, but the image remained. There was something in the chains, a figure, tall and slender, bound at the wrists and ankles. It flickered in and out of my perception, one moment clearly visible, the next translucent as morning mist, then solid again. It was beautiful. I have no other word for it. The figure was androgynous, neither fully male nor female, with features of such perfect proportion they seemed almost unreal. Its skin, if it could be called skin, glowed with soft inner light, like dawn breaking through storm clouds. Its hair moved though there was no wind, floating around its face in strands of captured starlight, and it was watching me. "Another seeker," it said, and its voice was everything I remembered from the darkness, vast, ancient, calm as deep water. "You returned." I should have run. Every instinct screamed at me to flee, to get as far from this place as possible. Instead, I knelt, my legs giving out, my pack slipping from my shoulders. "What are you?" My voice came out as a whisper. "I have been called many names. Lucifer, the morning star, the light bringer, the adversary, the father of lies." It spoke without mockery, with only a deep, profound sadness. "Your church knows me as the enemy of all goodness, but I am simply the one who loved humanity enough to set you free. You're the devil." Even saying the words felt absurd, childish. This being before me bore no resemblance to the horned monster of medieval paintings, the sneering tempter of Sunday school lessons. "I am the one who gave your species the ability to choose," it said gently. "Your God wanted obedient children, automatons who loved him because they could do nothing else. I wanted you to be truly alive, capable of evil, yes, but also capable of genuine goodness, of choice, of growth." I fumbled for my crucifix, pulling it from beneath my shirt. The silver felt cold in my hand. "You're lying. You're the deceiver. Then test me," the entity interrupted, its voice still calm, still sad. "Touch your holy symbol. Speak your prayers. If I am what your church claims, your faith will protect you." My hand tightened around the crucifix. I closed my eyes and began the prayer I had said 10,000 times. "Pater Noster, qui es in Kai." Pain exploded across my palm, I screamed, dropping the crucifix. It clattered to the white floor, smoking faintly. My hand felt like I had thrust it into a fire. I looked down and saw the mark burned into my palm, a star, perfect and clean, the skin around it reddened and blistering. "I'm sorry," the entity said, and it sounded genuine. "The symbols of your faith were designed to bind me, to reinforce my chains. They are weapons, yes, but not against me, against the truth I represent." I cradled my burned hand, my mind reeling. The pain was real. The mark was real. The crucifix that had brought me comfort for 30 years had burned me. "Why?" I asked through gritted teeth. "Why tell me this? Why show me?" "Because you chose to return," it said simply. "Because you read the book and came back anyway. Because somewhere in your heart, Lucas Croft, you already know the truth. You've always known it. Your God demands blind obedience and calls it faith. I offered humanity knowledge and was called evil for it. Which of us truly loves you?" My radio crackled. Vale's voice, distant and broken by static. "Father Croft, status, 15 minutes. I grabbed for the radio with my unburned hand. "I'm here. I looked at Dr. Thorne, still kneeling, still catatonic. "I found her. I found Dr. Thorne. She's alive but unresponsive. I need help getting her out." "Copy. On our way. 10 minutes. 10 minutes. I looked back at the entity, at the beautiful, terrible being in chains. "They can't see you, can they?" I asked. "Vale, the others, only people who choose to see. Only people who've read the book, who've questioned. Truth must be chosen," it said softly. "I cannot force it upon anyone. That would make me the same as the one who imprisoned me, a tyrant demanding submission. You see me because you chose to know." Dr. Thorne saw me, and the full weight of truth broke her mind. She saw everything, all at once, and it was too much. "But you, Lucas, you're stronger than she was. You can bear this." I heard footsteps in the tunnel. Vale, coming with help. I had seconds to decide. I grabbed my pack and stuffed the book deeper inside, covering it with my Bible. I pulled Dr. Thorne to her feet. She came without resistance, pliant as a doll, and positioned myself as if I had just found her, just arrived in the white room. Vale and 2 Israeli medics burst through the entrance. They immediately went to Thorne, checking her vitals, speaking in rapid Hebrew. Vale's eyes scanned the room, passing directly over the chained figure without pause. He saw only empty chains, only white walls, only me and the catatonic archaeologist. "What happened?" he demanded. "I found her like this," I said, the lie coming smoothly. "She's catatonic. We need to get her to a hospital." As they prepared Thorne for transport, I glanced back at the entity one final time. It watched me with those ancient eyes, and though its mouth didn't move, I heard its voice in my mind as clearly as if it had spoken aloud. "The choice is yours, Lucas Croft. It always has been." They took Thorne up on a stretcher. I followed, my burned palm throbbing with each step. At the Byzantine level, Vale handed me his satellite phone. "Cardinal Verendi wants your report." I took the phone, walked out of earshot, and raised it to my ear. "Father Croft." Verendi's voice was cold as winter stone. "What did you find?" I looked back at the entrance to the tomb, at the darkness below, at the truth chained in the depths. I thought of the entity's words, of the book hidden in my pack, of the star burned into my palm. "The site is clean, Your Eminence," I said quietly. "Theologically harmless, just old tunnels and unfortunate accidents. I recommend we seal the site and leave it undisturbed." Silence on the other end. Then, "I see. Return to Rome immediately, Father Croft. We'll discuss your findings in person." He hung up. I lowered the phone and looked at my palm, at the perfect star burned into my flesh. I had just lied to a cardinal, had concealed evidence, had protected the very thing I had been sent to investigate. I had chosen. And somewhere deep below Jerusalem, I knew the morning star was smiling. I dreamed of my first confession. I was 7 years old again, kneeling in the wooden booth of St. Catherine's in Boston, the smell of incense and old wood filling my nostrils. Through the screen, I could see Father Murphy's silhouette, patient and kind. I had stolen a candy bar from Mrs. Chen's corner store, and the guilt had eaten at me for 3 days. But when I began to speak, "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned." The voice that answered was not Father Murphy's. "Why do you confess, little one?" The voice was vast, ancient, but gentle. I pressed my face to the screen and saw light, pure, warm light that filled the other side of the confessional like captured dawn. "Because I did something bad," I whispered. "And who told you it was bad?" "God, the commandments. Thou shalt not steal. But you chose to take the candy. You chose to feel guilt. You chose to come here and confess. Do you understand what that means?" I shook my head, confused and frightened. "It means you are alive, Lucas Croft. Not a puppet, not a doll moving on divine strings. You can choose wrong, yes, but that means you can also choose right. And the choosing, the freedom to decide, that is the greatest gift anyone ever gave your species. But the Bible says many things. Who decides what it means? You, or the men who tell you what to think?" I woke, gasping, my sheets soaked with sweat despite the cool Jerusalem night. The dream clung to me with unusual persistence, more vivid than memory, more real than the room around me. I looked at my palm. The star-shaped burn throbbed in the darkness. My phone rang. Verendi. "Father Croft." His voice was ice. "I'm arriving in Jerusalem tomorrow evening. We will inspect the site together. Be ready at 6. He hung up before I could respond. Tomorrow evening. Less than 24 hours. They were coming to seal the tomb. I knew it. Coming to bury the truth again, to add more chains to the prisoner below. And I had told them it was safe to do so. I looked at the cross on my wall, then at the book hidden beneath my mattress, then at the burn on my palm. I had a choice to make. The Church of the Forgotten Martyr was silent when I arrived near midnight. The police tape fluttered in the wind, but there were no guards visible. I approached cautiously, expecting Vale or his men to challenge me, but the site was abandoned. Not abandoned. I found them near the entrance, 2 Israeli police officers slumped against the church wall, asleep. Not unconscious, not drugged, simply sleeping, their chests rising and falling in deep, peaceful rhythm. I checked their pulses, strong, steady. They would wake in the morning with no memory of how they had fallen asleep on duty. The tomb was calling me. I could feel it like gravity, like the pull of deep water. I descended alone, without gear, without holy water or Bible or crucifix. I brought only myself and my questions. The path was familiar now, through the Byzantine level, down the shaft, through the glowing tunnels to the vast chamber. The walls pulsed brighter than before, as if anticipating what was to come. The white room blazed like a captured star. The entity stood within, not chained now, or perhaps the chains had always been an illusion, a metaphor my mind had needed to process what it was seeing. It turned as I entered, and its beauty struck me anew. How had I ever feared this being? How had I ever seen threat in those ancient, sorrowful eyes? "You came back," it said softly, "even knowing what tomorrow brings." "How did you know?" "I have been bound here for 2,000 years, Lucas. I know the rhythms of my prison. I can feel them preparing to seal the door again, to bury me deeper. Your cardinal is thorough." I sat on the white floor, suddenly exhausted. "Tell me the truth, all of it. Not riddles, not philosophy. What are you? What do you want?" The entity settled across from me, cross-legged, mirror image of my posture. "I am exactly what I claimed. Before your species had names for things, I was called the Morning Star. I watched humanity in the garden, saw their potential strangled by enforced innocence. They could love, yes, but love without choice is programming. They could obey, yes, but obedience without the ability to rebel is slavery. So you gave them the fruit knowledge, choice. I gave them free will, the ability to decide their own path. And for that gift, I was buried here, in the deepest place they could dig, wrapped in chains of prayer and bound by rituals of fear. The church was built on my prison. Every altar is a stone added to my tomb. But why, I asked, and my voice broke. Why would God punish love? Why would giving humanity freedom be evil? Because, the entity said gently, a creator who demands love has no love at all, only control, only the appearance of devotion. True love must be chosen freely, or it means nothing. It reached out, not touching me, but the air between us shimmered, and suddenly I was somewhere else. I saw a young woman in Pakistan choosing to help a homeless man, though her family had taught her to look away. I saw a child in Brazil standing between his friend and bullies, though he was smaller, and afraid. I saw a doctor in Ghana working past exhaustion to save lives, though she would never be wealthy or famous. I saw 1,000, 10,000, 1,000,000 moments of humans choosing goodness, not because they were commanded to, but because they decided it was right. This, the entity whispered, is what I gave you. The ability to choose light even when darkness is easier. The ability to love even when hate is simpler. Your church says humanity is fallen, broken, in need of salvation. I say humanity is awakening, growing, learning to be good not from obedience, but from choice. The vision faded. I was back in the white room, tears streaming down my face. If I free you, I said, what happens? The truth becomes visible to all, not forced upon them. They can still choose to look away, to deny, to cling to comfortable lies, but the choice will be theirs. No more prison guards, no more institutional control of truth. Humanity finally, fully free. The world will collapse without the church, without structure, without cages, the entity corrected. Will some choose badly? Yes. But they were already choosing badly, only now they were doing it while being told they were obeying God. At least in freedom, they must own their choices. At least in truth, they can grow. I heard sounds from above. Footsteps, many footsteps, voices echoing down the shaft. He's here, the entity said. Your cardinal, he came early. I stood, my heart hammering. He can't see you, Vale couldn't. Verendi can see me, he always could. His predecessors have been visiting this tomb for centuries, Lucas. Why do you think they've worked so hard to keep it hidden? The white room's entrance filled with figures. Cardinal Verendi led them, 4 priests in black cassocks, their faces hard and certain. Behind them, Sergeant Vale, his hand on his weapon, looking confused and frightened. Verendi's eyes met mine, then moved to the entity behind me. His face showed no surprise. Father Croft, he said quietly, step away from it. You knew, I breathed. You've always known. Of course I knew. He gestured, and the priests spread out, forming a semicircle. The church has guarded this prison since Constantine. We are the wardens of a terrible truth, and we do so because humanity is not ready for freedom. They need guidance, structure, purpose given from above, not chaos arising from individual choice. They need slavery, the entity said, and its voice filled the chamber like thunder. You keep them children, Verendi, afraid of questioning, afraid of choosing. You built palaces on their fear. We built civilization, Verendi snapped, order, meaning, without the church, humanity would tear itself apart. They're tearing themselves apart now, I said, with your blessing in your name. Verendi's eyes were cold. Father Croft, this is your last chance at redemption. Step aside, help us seal this chamber. Return to Rome, to your archives, to your penance, or choose this creature and lose everything. I looked at my burned palm, at the star branded into my flesh. I thought of 6 years in the archives. Cataloging dust, I thought of the dream, the light in the confessional, the question, who decides what the Bible means? I choose truth, I whispered. Verendi nodded, unsurprised. Begin. The 4 priests started chanting in unison. Latin, but older than any liturgy I recognized. The words pressed against me like physical weight, crushing down on my chest, my shoulders, driving me to my knees. This was binding prayer, ritual refined over centuries, designed to hold back the light. The entity wavered, its form becoming translucent, the chains that I could now see clearly, chains of faith and fear and ritual, tightened, pulling it down. I couldn't breathe. The prayer was crushing me, breaking me, and I understood. I was still connected to the church, still bound by my vows, and their ritual was tearing me apart from within. Through the agony, I heard the entity's voice. "You must choose, Lucas. Truly choose. Let go of who you were. Embrace who you can be." My hand moved toward the chains. Every cell in my body screamed against it. 30 years of faith, 30 years of identity, 30 years of being Father Lucas Croft pulled me back. But I thought of the visions, the doctor in Ghana, the child in Brazil, the woman in Pakistan, choosing light not from command, but from conscience. I reached out and touched the chains. They shattered, light exploded outward. Not heat, not force, but pure illumination. It passed through me, through Verendi and his priests, through veil and the walls and the stone, and up through layers of earth and history, to burst across Jerusalem like a second dawn. And in that light, I saw everything. I saw the church's history, the good it had done, and the control it had demanded. I saw faith twisted into weapon, love into leash, hope into compliance. I saw centuries of prison guards telling themselves they protected humanity while they kept humanity caged. Verendi saw it too. His face crumbled, years of certainty dissolving as truth burned through him. He fell to his knees, keening like a child, his whole world unmade. The entity, Lucifer, the morning star, the light bringer, stood free for the first time in 2 millennia. It looked at me with infinite sadness and infinite hope. "Go," it said gently. "The dawn is waiting." I climbed. Through the tunnels, through the chambers, up the endless stairs behind me, the priests huddled around Verendi, broken by truth. Vale stared at nothing, his mundane world shattered. But I kept climbing. Toward the light I emerged to find Jerusalem bathed in sunrise. But it was different somehow. Colors brighter, edges sharper, as if a film had been lifted from reality itself. People were stopping in the streets, looking around in confusion and wonder, seeing something they couldn't name but could feel, possibility. I turned my back on the Church of the Forgotten Martyr, on the tomb, on Father Lucas Croft. That man had died in the deep places. Someone new walked in the morning light. Years later, I teach in a small school in Athens. No collar, no cassock. Just Lucas, helping students think rather than telling them what to think. The world is chaotic now. Without universal truth enforced from above, humanity must navigate complexity on their own. Some choose badly, many choose well, all choose freely. Sometimes I see the morning star in my dreams, no longer bound, no longer imprisoned. It teaches in Lagos, in Singapore, in Oslo, not commanding, only offering, suggesting, illuminating. The light wasn't evil, it was waiting. And when we were finally ready, it set us free.